Good afternoon. This is Marcia Waters, Director of DOOR's Division of Real Estate. Today is February 26, 2024, and the time is 2 p.m. I will now call the meeting to order. Before I call roll, I would like to advise the task force and members of the public that while the Division of Real Estate has been tasked with leading this task force and ultimately the issuance of the task force's report, the views, opinions, and recommendations discussed and expressed by the task force are not the views, opinions, or recommendations of the Division of Real Estate or the Department of Regulatory Agencies. And with that, I will now call roll. Joe McConnell.
Present.
Dr. Denise Davis. Natasha O'Flaherty. Brian Matisse.
Present.
Burton Adler.
Present.
Barry Wilson. Representative Parenti.
Here.
Senator Gonzalez. Marianne McGeady.
Present.
Christopher Elliott. Jennifer Tanaka.
Here.
Steve Odorizio. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Sarah.
Wonderful. Well, hello again, everyone. We're going to just spend a couple minutes here going through the agenda and some logistics before we get to our public comment period. So first thing that I want to just show you here is our agenda for the day, and which I just my slideshow to go. There we go. First up today, we have two sections in our agenda. Our first section today is going to be dedicated to public testimony with members of the public who signed up in advance using the registration form provided by DORA. As a reminder, this form was opened between February 9th and close of business on February 19th. We had 25 total individuals sign up for public comment, and so therefore we extended the duration of this meeting today so that all of those people could participate as speakers and share their comments with the task force in today's session. All members of the public who signed up during that window were emailed with instructions on how to participate today. The second part of our meeting will be dedicated to our task force reflection and response to the themes that we hear about today and potential insights or solutions that can be included into our final report. And finally, just an important note about our public testimony. In order to honor our commitment to accommodate as many of the members of the public as possible, while also ensure that each speaker has an equal time to speak, there will not be an opportunity for task force members to ask questions or interact with our speakers during the testimony period. This was noted in the advanced materials that were sent out with the agenda last week. However, task force members are encouraged to take notes during the public testimony period, and in particular, note specific themes and input that you would like to highlight during a facilitated discussion after public testimony. And right there on the slide, you see I have 2 points there that I want you to really think about as we are listening to the public today so that we can have a good informed conversation at the end of public testimony. Now, just a quick overview of our public testimony process. We have organized our testimony under 4 main topics, and they are communications with homeowners regarding Metropolitan District processes and homeowners' rights and responsibilities, tax levying authority and practices, governance policies, including voting and elections policies, and other issues confronting Metropolitan District homeowners' rights. When members of the public signed up to speak today, they were asked to select which topic they wish to speak to. We will work through the order of topics as listed in this slide, and speakers will generally be speaking in alphabetical order by last name. I will call on each speaker in order and also indicate who the next speaker will be so that everyone has time to prepare for their turn. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes total to provide public comment. There will also be a timer on the screen to help you manage your time. At the end of the 3-minute time, your microphone will be muted and we'll move on to the next speaker. So with that, we are ready to start the public comment process. And I understand we'll be admitting some folks into the meeting room at their time. So we'll let folks get a chance to get into the room. And maybe Dora team, you can just give me a thumbs up when you have everybody in the room that is scheduled to speak on this first topic. And again, this topic is communications with homeowners regarding Metropolitan District processes and homeowners' rights and responsibilities. All right, our first speaker up is Judith Lazar. Judith, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Sarah, we don't have Judith in attendance. We do have
We
Pam.
do not.
We do have Pam
Okay,
Schrader available.
wonderful. I'm going to make a note for Judith, and if she joins us, we will come back to her. All right, our first speaker then is Pam Schrader. Pam, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm concerned that there are meetings going on between the board of directors of my HOA and the management company that are unannounced. And I was told it's okay because they don't actually do voting or make decisions at those meetings. They're just discussing things. The other kinds of meetings that are being set up that are unannounced are committee meetings. And this can be about fire mitigation, any number of topics. And these, we don't even know about these committees until later. They say, oh, this committee's been working on it. It's a committee that nobody's ever heard of. It's not on the website. It wasn't, I've been to all the board meetings. It's never been announced. The meetings aren't announced. This has been sort of ongoing. And I sort of was told, I think by somebody at the office there that that was okay. I just want to hear what your all opinions are of that.
Ms. Schrader, did you have additional comments that you wanted to make? Because at this point in the testimony, we are not going to have our task force members responding. Okay. So were there other comments that you wish to make? Because you do have about 1.5 minutes left.
I have another comment. I'm not sure this is the right place, but it's about fire mitigation. Our HOA, we had a Colorado State Forest Service state level. He's in charge of fuel loading, and he does the maps, the high risk maps for the Colorado State Forest Service. He came in August of 2023 to a board meeting, made a presentation, and gave many recommendations that he made pretty strongly. Like, for example, that we should be mowing the grass in the common areas 2 times per year, June and September. But none of this, there's no plans to do this. There's no discussion of it. I just don't know. I don't think any of this, a lot of this is going to happen until maybe the governor or the state or somebody or the county steps in and says, you have to do fire mitigation. We're doing some things, but many of the main things aren't being done. So that was my only other comment, and I'm not sure if that's relevant here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Ms. Schrader. Appreciate your time today. We'll move on to our next speaker. Do we have Gail Bell on the call?
One moment, sorry.
Okay, great. If Gail is going to be joining us, just so you know, Dale Borenson will be our next speaker after Ms. Bell has a chance to speak.
Can you hear me?
We can. Go right ahead.
Thank you. My name is Gail Bell, and I thank you for the opportunity to come in today. I've lived in Colorado for 40 years, and I have built 5 houses over those years. All 4 of my former homes were not in metro districts. My present home that I built almost 10 years ago is in 2 metro districts. When I purchased my home, I never received any disclosure regarding metropolitan districts, and I actually was lied to by the closing agent, which I discovered over time. Residents like myself have no voice or democratic rights with regard to our exorbitant taxes and how our community is managed. Metropolitan districts are a clear example of taxation without representation. I wish that if I had to pay some of the highest taxes for a modest home, that money would go to improve our schools, our healthcare, and our aging infrastructure. Metro districts are contributing to our homeless crisis in Colorado. Housing is no longer affordable, tax rates and fees are exorbitant and keep increasing. 60% of my taxes go to my developer and will continue to do so long after I am gone for decades. I have waited for 10 years now for our state legislature to help the people of Colorado. While disclosure is important, there is much more work to be done. We, the people, have been ignored and forgotten for far too many years. We are counting on all of you on this task force to recommend and to advocate for positive and substantial changes to our state laws that will protect and benefit all of the home buyers of Colorado. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. Appreciate your time today. Also, and I apologize to everyone, I should have been wearing my glasses. Ms. Bell was speaking to tax levying authority and practices. So that is the topic that we have now moved on to. Our
Sir,
next speaker.
And
Yes.
just say one thing.
and I apologize for the late arrival, Natasha. I was having a problem. I checked the wrong inbox email.
Not a problem. Thank you. Thank you,
Yes,
Natasha.
Sarah,
One comment I would like to make before we start.
I'm sorry. Can I please pause for a moment? We are not going to allow task members to ask questions of those that are providing testimony. So was there something else that you needed to ask, Natasha?
Absolutely. And not to ask. What I would ask is, I think no different than when legislative bills come before the House and Senate, people, I found the 19th an arbitrary cutoff. So perhaps it'd be prudent, if we're limiting to the testimony today to that hour or 2.5 hours, if we allowed people to, in the comment section, be heard. I found that cutoff on the 19th to be arbitrary, and I think it takes away a lot of voices that would have normally been here at the table. So my ask today would be if we turn the comments on, so the public that did not get a chance to, timely sign up can still say if they're what their views are, if they're for or against Metro District reform. So that's all. And apologize for the late arrival in the meeting.
No worries. No worries, Natasha. I do need to defer to Dora on this because I know there were some specific settings that had to be established up front for this webinar format. So Dora, can you advise on best process for that?
Yeah, we cannot turn on the comments for the public, Natasha. However, they can go to our Dora Engage and leave comments that we've had up since the task force started, and we have been providing those to the task force.
All right. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. All right. So we are still on the topic of tax levying authority and practices, and Dale Borenson is our next speaker. Go ahead, Dale. Dale, we see that you are on the call. Perhaps you just need to unmute yourself. There we go.
Okay. My questions regard the mill levy adjustments. It is my understanding, and what I've been told for our Metro District, that the basic assessment is supplied by the assessor's office to the developer, and based on the repayment requirements and the maintenance requirements, they set the mill levy. As I understand it, there is no oversight on how those mill levies are adjusted, and they do it basically off of their good faith that they're following the budget. In the last 2 years in this particular Metro District, the income has exceeded the requirements of the budget for the debt payback, and they've just applied that money to subordinate bonds to pay down the debt on the long term. That benefits the developer, but does nothing for the homeowners that constantly pay more and more every year. I would like to know if there's some way that that money can be closer regulated so that the benefits fall more to the homeowners and the residents rather than to the developers. In addition to that is because our Metropolitan District is set up where debt recovery and maintenance are both covered under the same header. Those additional funds we've requested that some of that money be applied back to the maintenance where we need the money. And it's our understanding, or we've been told, that that's not possible, that once it's in the bucket for debt reduction, it has to stay there. And I would like to know if there's any possibility that that is incorrect or if that can be changed.
All right, Dale, was that the end of your public comment, or did you have additional things that you wanted to say?
On this particular subject, that's the end.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you for your time. We're glad that you could join us today. Our next speaker is Jason Carroll. And again, we are on the topic of tax levying authority and practices. And after Jason, we have Don Johannes. So go ahead, Jason.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and members of the committee. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I've had the opportunity to work with metropolitan districts for over 20 years. And as the leader for a professional services firm here in Colorado with over 250 employees, one of the issues that are facing our staff or the largest issue is the affordability and availability of housing, affordable housing. In my experience over my 25 years, the metropolitan districts allow for a greater supply of housing, which helps to contribute to that process. I also wanted to talk about a few of the things that I've heard already here today is that there's an inability to participate and influence the taxation process. That has not been my experience as a person that lives in a metro district and has worked with them. There's certainly now annual meetings that you're available to participate in and attend. The budget meetings are posted. There's information available on the websites. Elections for the board of directors. It feels to me that there's a number of opportunities to participate and get involved should you choose to do so. Some of the other benefits that I've experienced relative to the metropolitan district structure is the fact that it allows for development to pay for its own way, which is a really important mechanism that doesn't bog the supply of housing down with going to a vote of people that aren't going to be positively impacted by the development that's taking place. It also gives communities a choice to determine what level of services and amenities that they want. And so those are, and ultimately, an efficient and a low cost of opportunity to borrow to fund the infrastructure that's being put in for a community. And so that concludes my comments, Sarah. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate your time today. Our next speaker is Don Johannes, and after Don, we have Kathy Schultz. So Don, you are up. Don, you may have to unmute yourself. We see that you're there, but your audio, there you go.
Sorry, I thought I already did. My name is Don Johannes. I'm the president and the treasurer of a small affordable housing HOA in Central Park. And I'm not sure why I was asked to make a comment. Was there a comment that I submitted? Does anybody know?
I believe everyone who signed up to provide public comment was sent the information about this, but did you not sign up via the form?
No, I did not.
All right. Well, you are welcome to provide comment at this time on the topic of tax levying authority and practices if you would like. If you do not have comment, that's all right as well. We can certainly hop off if you do not have comment.
I don't have a comment on that, but could I make just a short comment on something else?
Right now we are discussing tax levying practices and authority. Is there another topic that you had wanted to comment on?
Just that, would it be possible for mortgage companies to collect the HOA fees like they do property tax and insurance for homeowners and then submit quarterly payments to the HOA? That's my only request, my only comment. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Don. Appreciate that. All right, next up we have Kathy Schultz. Kathy, I see you are on and your microphone is turned on, so please go right ahead.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to comment. I have lived in and out of Colorado, primarily in the Denver metropolitan area since 1968. And I now live and own a home and live in an area that has not one, but two metropolitan districts.
Kathy, you have muted yourself. Looks like perhaps inadvertently. So please, yeah, so please turn your microphone back on.
Yeah.
There you go. You're on.
Yeah. I live in a metro district where I live has 2 metropolitan districts. Over 60% of my money goes to those 2 groups, not to the police, not to the schools, not to the roads. And my question is, and I would like the group to think of this and discuss it later, exactly what are the benefits of having a metropolitan district? Because it strikes me as it's rather an archaic fascist dictatorship type of democracy. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Kathy. We appreciate you joining us today. This concludes the speakers that we had signed up for the tax levying authority and practices topic of our discussion. And so we're now going to move on to our governance policies, including voting and election policies topic. And we have a handful of folks who are going to be speaking to that. Our first speaker will be Debbie Axum, followed by Ben Butler. Do we have Debbie Axum on? Yes, we do. I see you're on, Deborah, and your microphone is on. So please feel free to start.
Thank you. I understand the value of licensing, having been a former licensed real estate broker for over a decade. And I'm here to ask for better governance for our HOA leadership through the CAM licensure. My HOA, in the past 2 years, we have gone from 1.25 million, this breaks my heart, to 325,000 in reserves. No money has been put in reserves in the past 2 years. I've only served on the board for 2 years, by the way. So this is all my fault, apparently. All communications between board members and or managers are also not available to all directors. These are things that are directly in violation of good sound principles and even the statutes, but there are no consequences. I have heard too many times at this point, my short 2 years, you might want to speak to an HOA attorney. Having listened to this task force for approximately 6 hours over the months, I am both encouraged and discouraged. I do not have the means to fight this group of people in court. The owner of the new property management company is an attorney himself. Through their policies, they have secured their own future elections as desired for whoever they want to be in power by giving control to the board through their new policies. Our new policies, which I voted against. I believe for 2 years, their interest in the HOA is not entirely good faith. When one director negotiates all of the contracts and sits on multiple HOA boards, it gives the appearance of a professional board member. When one investor signs a contract with a new property management company and then takes a lucrative job as their accountant in the same year, it appears to be not just a conflict of interest, but perhaps self-dealing. Please note, not a word of this has yet to be mentioned in the minutes. Those seem to be very carefully controlled. It is not possible for me to police all of the things that are happening myself. For our HOA, the money has already been spent. The assets will soon, the assessments, will soon increase. Liens will increase, and they will have, meaning the board members, will have the earliest knowledge. This past year, one lien became our first example of the benefit that investors might make of their HOA director positions.
Ms. Axum,
Yes.
I apologize, but we are at the 3-minute time frame, time limit. So unfortunately, we have to conclude your comments now. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry.
All right. So next up, we have Ben Butler. And again, this is governance policies, including voting and elections of metro districts. And after Ben is Evelyn DiNardo. So Ben, you are up next.
Sarah, I do not show Ben or Evelyn in attendance.
Okay, wonderful. Then we will move on to John Henderson. We have John next, and after John, I have Rogine Howard as our next speaker. So, John, please go right ahead with your comments.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Nice to be with you all. My name is John Henderson, a former resident of Solterra Metro District, known as Fossil Ridge Metro District. When I moved in, no one told us that 8 members of the developer's family and employees had voted amongst themselves to impose debt authority on the residents of $4.9 billion. When I moved in, no one told me that 8 members of the developer's family and his employees had issued debt already equal to $29 million. When we started to recall the developers off of our board, the attorney for the developer said, "We'd be happy to leave the board and return your seats to you if and only if you agree to issue another $30 million in bond debt." They said quite plainly, as Kyle Thomas said to the legislature last year, "We don't trust you. We don't trust you to pay back what the developer spent on infrastructure." I said to him, "We are residents, we are educated people, we are successful people, and we pay our debts. But we always insist that whoever is asking us to pay a debt, prove a debt." And I turned to Kristen Barr, the attorney, one of the other attorneys for the developer, and I said, "Kristen, what did you spend the $29 million on that was issued in debt 2 years ago?" And she, without skipping a beat, turned to me and said, "We're still trying to figure that out." This is 11 years after the money was spent. Later on, the developer said to us, laughingly, "Why do you want an accounting for how we spent the money? Because you owe us so much more in interest. You will never begin to pay off the principal." And indeed, they later told us that of that $29 million in bond debt that had been issued, and we were paying $2 million a year on, of that $29 million, $7 million paid principal and $22 paid interest. The last 7 years, have been working with others and individually to educate residents about metro districts. I've talked to, I don't have a count, dozens of residents who are pleading with me, "Please tell me who can fix this. Please tell me why I can't vote. Please tell me why they are harassing me and my neighbors and trying to keep us off the board. Please help me." And I have to tell them,
Mr. Henderson, I
quite
apologize.
simply,
We are
I'm sorry.
at the 3-minute mark, so I apologize. We're going to have to move on to our next speaker. But just a reminder to all of our folks providing testimony, if you're not able to get through all of your comments in your 3-minute allotted time, you are welcome to provide written comment through the DORA's website. So thank you, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Rogine Howe, followed by Kim Nichelle Rivera. And it looks like Rogine has not joined us. Is that correct, Eric?
That's correct.
Okay. But I do see we have Kim Nichelle, so we'll have her go next, followed by John Schmidt. So Ms. Rivera, please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you for letting us speak today. I'm here to urge changes to the way elections are held in metro districts. We are a very small residential metro district. There's 110 homeowners, and our budget is extremely small. We have 5 board members. We currently have 1 board member who is only on the board because no one else wanted to run for the open position. He is a nuisance in our community. He's had multiple negative interactions with neighbors, many involving police contact. One neighbor has a restraining order against him for physical assault. This is his 2nd time on the board. The first time he resigned, acknowledging his inappropriate aggressive behaviors that caused us to almost lose a vendor. But nothing has changed. He bullies the other board members and our vendors. Last year, like I said, we almost lost our management company and our landscaping company. He accuses the board of not being financially responsible, but he has no problem submitting multiple CORA requests for records he either already has access to or could simply ask for. Because of actions like this and continually having to have meetings with our district attorney regarding his actions, he alone has cost the district over $12,000 in legal fees. Apparently, the only way to get him off the board is for him to either commit a felony or for the Metro District to hold a recall election, which we are told could cost upwards of $10,000. Our community cannot afford this, and even if we could, there is no keeping him from running again for a board position at a later time. He alone is the reason the board had to adopt a code of conduct, which he continually refuses to follow, and in the end, the conduct itself has very little teeth in stopping his behaviors. He is the reason no one else wants to get involved in the board or other community functions. People don't want to deal with him. They don't want to be on his radar. Just recently, he claimed to be protesting outside my home while he stood out front yelling obscenities for all the neighbors to hear. This went on for hours. On this day, he also threatened to kill my husband and my dogs, and yet there is still nothing we can do to get him off the board. I want to bring awareness to the problem of the lack of authority within metro districts when it really matters. I strongly encourage this issue to be addressed and find a way for communities to be able to better handle problems like this without being forced to have expensive, time-consuming elections. That's all I have. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Rivera. We appreciate your time today. Our next speaker is John Schmidt, followed by Patty Syke. I believe, is John not with us? Is that correct, Eric?
That's correct.
All right, then Ms. Syke, I see you are here, so please go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comments. Hi, Patty, we see that you're on. Oh, there you go. Nope, you're muted again. You're on mute, so go ahead and unmute yourself again.
Okay.
Perfect. We can hear you. Go right ahead.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Patty Syke, and I'm a homeowner in Green Valley Ranch East Metro District number 7. I'm speaking as a homeowner in the district, but I also currently serve on this board. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I am one of 2 directors on the board who are homeowners and live within the community. There are 2 other directors on our board who are Oakwood Homes employees and do not live in the community. We have 1 board vacancy. The Oakwood Homes employee directors were originally appointed to the board and claimed to possess 0.155 acres of property located within the boundaries of our district. The Adams County Clerk and Recorder's Office has no record of any property which obligates either developer director to pay taxes in Adams County. This has bearing on many issues. When questioned about the above issue, our Metro District Council advised that the Oakwood Homes employees have each filled out a contract for purchase of a director's parcel. The contract has not been confirmed and the directors do not actually own any property within the boundaries of our district. I've been advised that allegedly the mere filling out of a contract and keeping it in a file somewhere is sufficient for serving on multiple Metro District boards associated with our community. All requests to obtain a copy of this contract or even view this contract have been refused by these Oakwood Homes employees and District Legal Counsel. I've also attempted to obtain this document through the Secretary of State's office because it was an exhibit to the conflict of interest disclosure statements filed before each Metro District meeting. The Secretary of State's office advises they do not actually have copies of these exhibits filed with the disclosures and has directed me back to the filing parties for copies. This all ties back to the fact that our district continues to have a vacancy on our board for over 6 months. The homeowner directors have repeatedly attempted to fill this vacancy. I published a story here on the task force website on January 4th of this year that outlines the issues. As recently as February 19th, I again nominated a vetted resident of our community to serve on our board. And again, it was a 2-2 deadlock vote with the developer directors voting nay. All this is based upon Oakwood employee directors' contention they qualify to serve on this board. What I am asking for today is that this task force recommend to legislators very clear language on this director parcel issue with regard to these contracts. Legislation needs to be written that at the point there are sufficient, capable, and qualified residents available to serve, developers should be required to relinquish majority rule on these boards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patty. Appreciate your time today. Our next two speakers on governance policies, including voting and elections, is Jolene Simon, followed by Jim Soylan. So Jolene, I see you have joined us, so you have the floor and can go ahead and unmute yourself. Jolene, we see that you've joined. There you go. You're unmuted. Go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm actually kind of piggybacking off of Ms. Rivera's. We're very similar, same district, actually. I didn't realize how close we were in our verbiage. But basically, I would like to discuss the election process a little bit further. We are a very small district, 110 homes, five board seats, very small budget. We recently were turned over to the homeowners from the developers about 2 years ago. They left us very financially strapped. We were short $50,000 annually. We are working on getting our budget into place. So the election process is very costly for us. And with our disgruntled homeowner, it makes it very difficult for people to want to be on the board. And then when we have to have these elections and trying to get him off of the board, it costs us money that we don't have. So to be able to, I know people don't always like the boards to have a lot of authority, but to be able to have a little bit more authority to protect our homeowners in situations like this is something that we would really appreciate things to be looked at. And not to have an election, maybe just a vote or some type of veto. And, we can't control him having a felony to get off the board, but something so that we could protect our homeowners from people like that being able to be on the board. I guess that's all I really have to add to that. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Simon. We appreciate your time. All right. Our next speaker and our final speaker on governance policies, including voting and election, is Jim Soylan. Jim, I see you had joined us. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you. Go right ahead.
Great, thanks. My name is Jim Soyland. I'm a resident of Sterling Ranch in Littleton. My community is governed by our developer in the guise of a Title 29 authority called CAB. I've reviewed many CAB forming documents, and the task force and legislature should see these CABs for what they are: authoritarian kleptocracies. CABs are created by intergovernmental agreements, air quotes, where the developer agrees with him or herself and represents all the relevant metro districts agreeing. In these so-called agreements, the developer subordinates all the constituent metro districts to a CAB and grants themselves indefinite control of the CAB. Residents do get to claim board seats, but these nonsense agreements ensure the CAB holds a majority until the developer chooses to relinquish control or at the time of build-out. Be clear on this. CAB appointees are not elected. They cannot be recalled, but they control the community's government. That is authoritarianism. This violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, requiring proportional representation among state and local governments. It also violates the Colorado Bill of Rights, Article 2, Section 1, which reads in part, all political power is vested in and derived from the people. Why would a developer care to do this? Simply put, profit. Developers strip future residents of their Tabor protections and use their control of CABs to issue municipal bonds. Then the developer privately purchases those bonds for a tax-advantaged profit. The developer CAB thus has a perverse incentive to issue as much debt as unprotected residents can possibly repay. After all, they'd rather make 8% interest on $300 million than $30 million. Industry actors may claim they're safeguards, but the developer's CAB hires all of the safeguarding parties. It's really the fox guarding the hen house all the way down. There's no sane reason to grant developers long-term unelected control of a government, and these Title 29 authorities, aka CABs, should be seen for the authoritarian kleptocracies that they are. Also, the legislature needs to know the industry's principal claim that metro districts make housing more affordable is completely without merit. I hold an economics degree from the School of Mines. I previously led the data engineering and data science functions for a leading nationwide real estate brand. I can tell you with some confidence there is no evidence that metro districts lower the cost of housing. None. And that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Until an organization whose livelihood is not dependent on metro district profits finds a substantial cost savings to homeowners, legislators should not be duped into thinking metro districts make housing more affordable. Industry lobbyists use arguments like Tabor or development must pay its own way. That's rhetoric. That is not evidence. Some people think metro districts stretch out the cost of infrastructure. Well, stretching out cost is the explicit purpose of a mortgage. Metro districts merely hide that cost and put it in the hands of people with an incentive to overspend. The most transparent way for consumers to see that what their home costs is to include all the costs in the purchase price of their home. If developers need loans to put in infrastructure, they should be on the hook for those loans, since they are the ones profiting from land development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Soyland. That was very punctual, right on the 3-minute mark. So thank you so much for joining us today.
I tried hard, ma'am.
Yes. So that concludes our governance policies, including voting and elections policies portion of our public comment. And so we are going to transition now to our other issues confronting Metropolitan District homeowners' rights. So our speaker order for our first two speakers is Jim Gibson, followed by Susie Brunkard. So do we have Jim on? It looks like we do. All right, Jim, you are up first as our speaker, so you may go ahead and unmute yourself and begin your testimony. Jim, we can see that you've joined us, but perhaps you're just not unmuted right now.
Can you hear me now?
We sure can. Go right ahead.
Good afternoon. Developer-controlled metro districts, essentially private local governments, have been abusing their residents for decades. Residents have no real checks and balances on these non-resident developer board members, especially when trying to ensure their communities will not spiral into insolvency. To make matters worse, no conflict of interest protections with real teeth are in place, despite the fact that the state recognizes this conflict of interest. Simply put, the interests of developer board members are not the same. In fact, they are often in direct conflict with the people who are paying the taxes that benefit the bottom lines of developers. As you know, there are many problems with metro districts. However, the central problem occurs when developer board members are exclusively making taxation and spending decisions in opposition to the interests of residents. Developer-controlled metro district boards have repeatedly abused residents by also keeping residents in the dark about their metro district's fiscal matters for years, encumbering them with so much debt that they are like credit card holders who cannot make minimum payments, not even keeping up with the interest owed. As time goes by, the principal on the taxpayer's debt just grows and grows. 2, forcing residents to foreclose on their homes because they cannot pay the skyrocketing metro district property taxes. 3, burdening residents with millions of dollars of debt for decades right before newly elected residents can replace outgoing developer board members. 4, slowing down investment in the rest of the development when newly elected residents on the board ask for a detailed accounting of developer spending. 5, concealing board vacancies and canceling elections by providing very little, if any, information to residents so they can understand that a metro district even exists in their community, let alone there are elections for metro district boards on which residents can serve. Informed residents are often harassed and intimidated by developers from serving on metro district boards. And finally, 6, banning metro district residents from using amenities that are actually open to the general public. The industry has repeatedly indicated that metro districts are subject to Tabor, implying that should be adequate accountability. That misleading statement omits some very important details. Typically, before any real residents move in, the only people who can vote are affiliated with the developer. At that point in time, the developer-affiliated voters waive Tabor, concentrating all the taxation and spending decision-making to themselves as Metro District board members. Unfortunately, Metro District's residents do not have the right to place measures on their ballots, thus having no opportunity to eventually restore their Tabor rights. For more specifics, I'm more than happy to provide each of you a document entitled Examples of Developer-Controlled Metro District Board Abuses. Guidance on how best to do that would be appreciated. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate your time. And just a reminder to our folks who are providing testimony that there is an ability to submit public comments in writing through the DORA portal. And I believe that you can also upload documents as well. So please take advantage of that feature for public input on this process. Our next speaker is Susie Brunkard, followed by Andina Frank. And I don't see Susie. Eric, has Susie joined us?
She has not.
Okay, so then we'll move on to our next speaker, which is Andina Frank. So Andina, I see you are on the call, so please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Hello, my name is Andina Frank, and I live in Sterling Ranch. We were enticed here by all the amenities that we were going to have. A rec center, reservoir to fish and paddle board on, school, mom and pop stores, restaurant and coffee shops, dark sky community, which there is an abundant number of lights, and they have never worked like promise. And let's not forget about the parks. Burns Park was supposed to be a large park and included an amphitheater. None of these have come to pass. It was a classic bait and switch and nothing but broken promises. The people who did this are still here in office and cannot be voted out or recalled. I was recently told that it takes money to build a park. Well, that's the point. We pay extraordinarily high taxes on these amenities. The CAB is collecting more taxes to build the parks, but yet they are also getting money from Douglas County to build them. So not only are the residents on the hook, but somehow the developers found a way to get the residents of Douglas County to pay too. So are the residents of Sterling Ranch now paying for the parks twice? Why are they allowed to be to demand more without delivering anything in return? These same people that make the decision seems to benefit them and not the residents. Not only did we not get the amenities, we have no say in the community rules such as holiday lighting. The CAB asked for our opinions, but it went on deaf ears. The developer on the board of directors have total control. They get what they want, even if the majority of the residents don't agree. We have community representatives, but really it's a name only. With the CAB holding the majority vote on the board of directors, the residents have no say. We pay higher taxes for the amenities we are not getting. And to make matters worse, we have no say on how much debt we are responsible for and what the money is spent on. The developers approve the debt, collect the debt to build the development, make a profit on the development, and then purchase the debt back and make a profit on that debt. On top of that, our fees for services going up by 5% each year. They promised costs would go down to once the build out occurred, but nothing has, but things have only gone up. The developer's son is the president of Sterling Ranch LLC, which founded Luminaire, the neighborhood technology service. The developer and family members, board of Dominion, the water company whose sole client base is Sterling Ranch. After living here 4 years, we have realized the CAB exists only to benefit the developer at the resident's expense. And because the CAB is not elected, there's nothing we can do. We need changes in the laws for the metro districts to keep this from happening again, and hopefully to stop what's going on in Sterling Ranch now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andina. Appreciate your time this afternoon. Our next speaker is Jason Cassay, followed by Gregory King. And Jason, I see you are on the call, so you may unmute yourself and start your comments.
You guys can hear me?
We can, thanks.
Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jason Cassay, and I'm a resident of Sterling Ranch in Littleton, Colorado. James Otis, a colonial legislator, said in 1764, "The very act of taxing exercised over those who are not represented appears to me to be depriving them of one of their most essential rights as free men, and if continued, seems to be in effect an entire disfranchisement of every civil right. Before a single house was built and without any accountability, the developers at Sterling Ranch established billions of dollars in debt authorization. Next, they voted away our tabor rights. They can issue bonds without oversight, where repayment is delayed for decades, to capitalize on the massive compounding interest that they are the beneficiaries of. We are currently burdened with almost $300 million issued at only 20% build out, and another $34 million on top of that will be issued this year. Through our property taxes, each resident is held responsible for over $150,000 of this snowballing debt. Metro districts are created by developers who appoint themselves, their family, and business partners. The developers of Sterling Ranch self-ordained themselves a perpetual majority, where their undeveloped district gets 5 votes and each resident-occupied Metro district only gets 1 vote. True resident control will not be granted until at least 2045, when it is too late, build-out is complete, and the debt can never be settled. The developer also established single-party agreements with himself through a pledge agreement to siphon all tax revenue from the Metro districts to their Title 29 authority government called the CAB. This pledge agreement converts Metro districts into puppet states, which are endowed with the outward symbols of authority, but in reality are disenfranchised. Further exacerbations persist in that our covenants are controlled by the CAB, and we are the only customers of the water company that the developer created, and he is the director of. We pay 110% more for services than nearby Centennial Water. Recently, the state of Colorado provided tax relief, which the CAB nullified by raising the Metro District mill levies to consume any amount of savings. If the Metro districts refused to rubber stamp the increase, they would have been in violation of the CAB agreements, and the CAB would have issued more bonds to be paid for by the residents. For context, the mill levy from Sterling Ranch is 14% greater than all other Douglas County taxing entities combined, and 274% higher than the apex ever reached by neighboring Highlands Ranch. Metro districts and other corrupt oligarchies like Sterling Ranch's CAB are violating Colorado Titles 29 and 32, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, and are using taxation jurisdiction for enormous profit generation at the expense of homeowners. I beseech this task force to take position against this rampant abuse of power in your report. Proposed banning of Title 29 authorities and dissolution of existing ones, ban developers from removing resident voting rights, and ban developers from buying back bonds to profit off their compounding interest. The only point where developers should be making a profit is when they sell their land to home builders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cassay. I appreciate your time this afternoon. Our next speaker is Gregory King, and after Mr. King, we have Jay Larson. So, Gregory, I see you are on and you are unmuted, so please go ahead with your comments.
I'm a resident of Sterling Ranch, Colorado, and Metro District 3 board member. Excuse me. One of our Metro 2 district board members recently invited John Henderson and JD Loeb to host an informational session by Zoom back in December of 2023. The meeting was recorded and published to the Coloradans for Metro District Reform YouTube channel with the title of CMDR and Sterling Ranch CAB. I encourage all of you to watch at least the first 38 minutes of the recording, where John Henderson deftly guides 25 or so Sterling Ranch residents through a litany of carefully crafted points to make a business case for dissolving our CAB. Here are just a couple of the many misleading things that are said in the first 38 minutes. At 13 minutes and 40 seconds in the video, John shows our 2024 budget, but all the examples he uses are from the 2022 column in the document. I can only presume he selected figures from 2022 instead of 2024 because the figures are significantly higher by 66.4 million in 2022, which of course is more dramatic. The primary problem with this particular point is John inflates the amount of tax dollars going solely to debt by 52 million, and also states the payments are being paid directly to the Sterling Ranch developer. He does this by conflating the bond and capital improvement expenditures and makes it seem like 162.5 million is only being paid toward bond debt, which is not correct. These are just a couple of examples of misleading statements and rhetorical tricks in the video. Misleading statements carefully qualified as opinions or thoughts. So let me offer an opinion of my own. I believe this video is an example of highly predatory approach to selling residents on a very expensive solution to solve a problem that doesn't actually exist. Which leads me to some of the following questions for this task force. In the case of Sterling Ranch, why are they allowed to say tax dollars are being funneled to the developer without showing evidence? Why are they not required to disclose that decreasing mill levies must be offset by large increases in annual homeowner assessments and fees for other services as seen in Solterra? Why are the reformers not required to disclose the costs associated with converting to a common interest community? It's not free. Why are they not required to disclose that homeowners still need to pay for a property management firm to manage a community on behalf of the HOA? Why are they not required to disclose that there is a potential for years of litigation associated with conversion to an HOA that could run into the hundreds of thousands, and in the case of Solterra, $1.2 million over a 5-year period of time? What reforms are being considered to ensure a few Metro District Board members are not able to plunge an entire community and literally thousands of residents into years of chaos, additional expenses, and potential high legal liabilities?
Hi, Mr. King. We are at our 3-minute time limit. So thank you very much for joining us today. We'll have to move on to our next speaker now. All right, so our next speaker is Jay Larson, and followed by Deborah Schulman. So Jay Larson, I see you have joined us and you are unmuted. So please go ahead with your comments.
Thank you. My name is Jay Larson. Let me start with the problem is not educating residents. The problem is the community's inability to influence conflict of interest decision-making bodies and the significant inability to hold these bodies accountable. My name is Jay Larson, and I'm a board member in Banny Lewis Ranch. The topic is an appropriate level of review, and I'll have to just brief overview of 4 major topics in this. Banny Lewis Ranch 1 is a developer district. The board of directors is all Oakwood Home employees. No residents can live or do live in that district. BLR has been a developer district since 2005, almost 20 years. In regards to conflict of interest, I want to point out one thing. All Metro districts involvement should be the norm for all contracts, service level agreements, contractual obligations that affect the community. The IGAs between my district and the developer district were executed while developer employees filled both boards of directors. Possible outcome can be that developer districts and their contracted management companies should be required to involve other district boards in contracts, service level agreements, contractual obligations, and this should be addressed from the state level. Regarding open records and transparency, comments that are provided by non-electors do not have to be responded to during the public hearing. And so in regards to this, possible outcomes are expand the already required annual report for developer controlled districts to include the items that I've addressed in here that I don't have time to go through, and others that come from the Metro Task Force findings. Also publish a record summary that is Metro District specific that goes into more details about applicable open records core Title 32 court decisions, and which expands the section for developer district metro districts due to the conflict of interest, and which reflects the current court decisions. The next has to do with maintenance. Currently, what should occur is a reserve study and a reserve budget line item can be mandated, since a portion of property taxes is for this maintenance, and that's a industry standard for maintenance. Lastly is municipal role oversight and enforcement. I am suggesting that the law require IGAs be renegotiated within 6 months after a board becomes controlled by residents. If it is not renegotiated, then it becomes void. Developer districts enact these IGAs when the developer controls both boards. One last point.
All right, Ms. Larson, Ms. Larson, we are past the 3-minute point. I apologize. I know So tough to get everything in 3 minutes, but I would just encourage you to provide some written comment on the last bit of your testimony so that the task force has an opportunity to review it without being rushed. Thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is Deborah Schulman, followed by Mike Baca. So Deborah, I believe I saw that you had joined us. Did we lose Deborah? Oh no, there she is. Deborah, I see you're on the call, but it looks like your microphone is muted. So please go ahead and unmute yourself. Yes, you should be good to go now. Yep. Yep.
My name is Deborah Schulman. My husband and I own a home in West Meadow Metro District in Fraser. I want to start by saying I'm not against metro districts. They can be an important tool for development as long as they are tightly regulated and there are robust homeowner protections. I think this is where Colorado has failed. When we signed a contract for our duplex, there was no mention of the West Meadow Metro District in the contract. The Metro District was deliberately kept secret. For nearly a dozen years, the developer and his wife were the only board members. We were never contacted by the Metro District by mail or email. Election notices were published in a small town newspaper an hour drive away and posted on a fence post somewhere on the enormous property. Consequently, there were no elections, no audits, and no accountability. The developer did not develop in a timely fashion according to the service plan, so unpaid interest was added to the debt each year, the magic of compound interest. In just over a decade, the developer made an $11 million profit off a $14 million investment off our tax dollars. There should be full disclosure upon purchase where we signed a document detailing the Metro District and the taxes. Plus, Metro District should be included in real estate listings. Had we known, we might have made a different choice. Our district now carries twice the debt that we started with. In other states, there's a fixed amount of debt for infrastructure on a property, usually to $30,000 to $40,000 plus interest, much like a home mortgage. Instead, in Colorado, maximum debt is issued based on the potential tax base. Unpaid interest is added to the debt each year, ballooning the debt and providing incentive to delay development. This is what happened in the West Meadow Metro District. Plus, recent legislation allows developers to buy their own bond debt, exacerbating the issues. The value of our property is now nearly 3 times what we paid for it in closing of January of 2018. The Metro District taxes are adding hundreds of thousands of dollars onto the cost of our home versus the fixed cost of infrastructure plus interest. These taxes go to huge profit margins for developers and investors, not to our county and city governments. This is not affordable, nor is it right. We are a Tabor state, and homeowners should be protected from this excessive and crippling taxation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Schulman. Appreciate your time today. Our next speaker, and actually our last speaker on this topic of other issues confronting Metropolitan District homeowners' rights, is Mike Baca. Mike, you have the floor. I see you are on, and you just need to unmute your microphone.
Okay, I'm here.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I want to speak on the BLR Banning Lewis Ranch Village B2 community changes that are going before the Planning Commission, and they are the builder is Oakwood, and our community was originally built based on desirable culture, and this culture was designed into the infrastructure. Sidewalk, trails, multiple parks and open spaces, gym, pool, and amenities, school placements, road laid out, and etc. In recent years, BLR has needed to support current residents because we have 4,000 homes. Promises for infrastructure have fallen short, and we all feel the impact every day. If Oakwood is allowed to begin construction on future villages without specific measurable accountability to building necessary infrastructure up front, the problem we all experience regularly could increase significantly. If we focus on the importance of infrastructure, the following not exhaustive list, but fall under the umbrella nicely. So the increase in density, Oakwood's note that they shared in the meeting on 12/20 states that the proposed amendment for Village B2 would not increase density. You can view this comment via link. Okay. We believe this is false and is direct conflict with the amendment proposal, as it clearly states density will increase. See the, okay, we've got clubhouse amenities. The second in that we just designated area as 55 plus community. The current amenity is not sufficient, as any have tried to use the pool in the summer, more likely experienced that they couldn't get in. Respectively, this is a separate issue aside from the challenge capacity restraints. We indicate that this less 5% of the community could use the amenities at the same time. So the open park spaces, while the B2 amendment proposes parks decreasing from the master plan, Oakwood shared plans to have a large park similar to the Vista Park in Village C. We would really like them to commit to building this park by way of including it in the formal amendment. Again, we would like to commit to doing up front before thousands of homes are built and density increases.
Mr. Facha, I apologize, but we are at our 3-minute time limit, so we'll have to wrap up your comments now. But just a reminder, you can always submit more written comment through the DORA portal.
All right.
Thank you. All right. So we did have a few folks who were not here when their name was called. So I do just want to confirm with Eric that none of these folks have since showed up, because we do want to give them their time if they have arrived. I'll just list them all, and then you can tell me, Eric, if any of them are here. We have Judith Lazar, Ben Butler, Evelyn DiNardo, Rogine Howe, John Schmidt, and Susie Brunkhard. Are any of those members of the public here and able to speak?
Sarah, yeah, we do not see any of those individuals.
Okay. And then I had one other last item I just wanted to note. There was a speaker, Paula Stewart, who was going to speak on the governance topic. And unfortunately, she was not able to be here to provide her testimony in person. So she has submitted some written comments to DORA staff, and they will be uploading that to the Google Drive. So I just wanted to make that note so that you could be on the lookout for Paula's comments, as she was not able to join us. So the next part of yes, Brian, I see you have a question.
Yeah, actually, I received from Gail Bell, who was one of the people who spoke, a text a little while ago, and she said that Judy Lazar, Evelyn DiNardo, and I think it's Rogine have all been trying to get in and can't get in. And so I don't know if someone at DORA can either send them a link again. Apparently, their whatever link they have is not working.
Eric, do we have the ability to send them that link?
Yes, one moment.
Okay.
I'll see what I can do.
We will do a resend. Brian, thank you for bringing that up. We'll make sure that technology is not the barrier for folks. We want to make sure everyone has their chance. So we'll give them a couple of moments. While we're waiting for this, I actually did want to just provide a little clarification on the timeline for the public comment sign-up sheet. And Natasha, thank you for asking that question, because I do want to clarify that for everyone involved. Just to make sure everyone's clear on the February 19th date and why we closed registration for the sign-up form on that date. It was primarily so that we could first make sure that all of our selected speakers did, and in this case, we actually were able to take all of our speakers, but we did want to make sure that speakers knew that they were able to testify and therefore had time to place that time on their calendars and that they could be here today. But also we had committed to this group that we would take as much public testimony as possible, and that would require extending the meeting time. So we did want to work with Dora with enough time so that that agenda could be sent out on time on the 20th, but also that we were able to extend this meeting time to the extra 30 minutes so that we could accommodate all of those speakers. So the 19th was selected with that deadline of getting the agenda and the meeting time out to everyone a week in advance, which has been our practice since the beginning of this. So I just wanted to clarify that, clarify what Dora was working on behind the scenes so that everyone understands why that was the sign up period. So Eric, any luck on getting some of those folks onto the call today?
I'm still emailing the link.
Okay.
So 1 moment.
Okay. Okay, great. We will give that another moment or two. Before we move on, I wanted to, this is a good opportunity to see if anyone has any questions on process or time, and just make sure that we've thoroughly answered Natasha's question on our timeline. All right, wonderful. Marianne, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I just had a question. It seemed that some of the comments had to do with the HOA task force as opposed to this task force. Will you be sharing those comments with the HOA task force so they get the benefit of that testimony?
I don't know, Dora, if we have the ability to provide that. Go ahead, Marcia.
So we can definitely make them aware that maybe they want to listen to this task force meeting just because of the comments that came up that seem to be more directed at that task force than this one.
Sounds sensible. And again, we're just giving folks a few minutes to join us if they were having difficulty accessing the link.
I'm checking now, Sarah.
Absolutely. We are running just a little bit ahead of schedule, so we do have a few minutes where we can give folks some time to sign on. One thing I might just mention to everyone is, again, when we get to our discussion portion, just make notes of some of those key themes that you would really like to elevate to the discussion so that we can get into that conversation efficiently when we are at that time. Also, just by way of process, so you all can be prepared, we do want to make sure that we are hearing from all of our task force members today. And so what we will do in our discussion is we will go around and let all of our task force members have an opportunity to select one theme that they would like to highlight and point out for the discussion. So that way we have a chance to hear from everyone. And as we have more time available, we will go back and let folks have a second opportunity to share more content at that time. But because we do have such limited time for discussion, we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to at least get their first and priority theme that they heard out for discussion before we go back and allow folks to offer more themes. I'm sure several themes are coming to light for folks. So we will have that opportunity, but we want to make sure that we're getting to everybody first before we get into additional comments. I'll review this again before we start the facilitated conversation, just so everyone's clear.
And all the emails did go out with the link, and I still do not see any of those individuals have joined.
Eric, is there a call-in option? If we were to provide a phone number, especially if Brian, if you are able to get a phone number to some of these folks that are trying to sign in. I don't know.
I don't have their phone numbers. I
Oh,
was
right.
contacted by Gail Bell. I guess I could
Okay.
provide serve a lot of intermediaries here.
In real time while we're live streaming. Always, always keeps us on our toes, doesn't it? All right, well, we can give it another minute or two, but again, we can certainly allow folks to provide that written comment so that we do hear that testimony through those written comments. And I see, Jennifer, you had your hand raised. Was there something you wanted to mention?
Oh, Sarah, you actually read my mind. I was going to say maybe if they're not able to join, they can, maybe Brian can tell them to submit something in written format so that it does get back to us so that we can hear what they have to say if they're not able to join.
Yes, I think that's probably is a smart move. And we will make sure that that is something that is shared with you all through the Google Drive so that you know to look for that public comment, which is very important. So, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and do a quick screen share of as we transition to our discussion. All right. All right, so you should see our meeting norms slide here for everyone, which thumbs up if you can see that. You should be able to. So again, just want to thank all the members of the public for giving their time today and sharing their personal experiences and insights with this task force. The remainder of our meeting is to provide the task force with an opportunity to reflect and respond to the testimony that we heard today. Now, as I mentioned before, we do want to make sure that every task force member does have an opportunity to speak. So I will calling on each of our task force members individually to share your thoughts. Up here, we just have our meeting norms slide. And again, these are just reminders that have been best practices we've been employing since the beginning of our process here. But we do have quite a bit of material that we're going to want to discuss today. So I just want to remind everyone to just share the space with your fellow task force members and just be attentive and thoughtful so that we are able to use this time wisely. So your prompts as a reminder is, what is the one theme that you heard across the body of public comment that resonated most with you? And then what new or additional solutions could be offered in response to the insights that you learned from the public today? So I want to just remind everyone that you probably have several themes that you want to share, which is wonderful, but we will go around and allow all of our task force members to share their top priority big theme that they would like to share with the task force. And then as we have time, we'll circle back so that folks can offer more than one theme. When we get to you, if someone has already spoken to some of the things that you had planned on speaking to, you can certainly say, I totally agree with so-and-so. That was a theme that resonated with me as well, because there is a lot of value in just seeing where, just seeing how some of these themes land with all of our members of the task force so that we're capturing kind of that consensus around some of those central themes. So with that, we will go ahead and start our discussion. I'm going to unshare my screen here so I can see all of you. And I will go around the screen here and make sure I get to everyone in order. So I am going to start with, I've got Joe McConnell actually at the top of my screen. So Joe, is there one particular theme that really resonated with you today? And if so, was there a specific solution, new solution perhaps, that we haven't already discussed that you'd like to share with the group?
Well, I'm not sure if this counts, but Miss Kim Michelle, she mentioned a nuisance director, and I've gotten over the years many calls about this. I would say that there is a bill right now. I believe it's HB 24-1296 for that would prevent a vexatious requester from basically doing what you were saying that director had done, repeated open records requests. Just off the top of my head, that's the first thing that I I thought you should follow the bill, and it might be worth testifying.
Great, Joe, thank you very much for that. Next on my list up here is Brian Matisse. Brian, go ahead. And again, one theme that resonated most with you and some potential solutions that can address that.
Thank you, Sarah. I think the one thing that and it comes from a lot of different perspectives here, is it seems to me that there is a need for some type of realistic oversight by a truly independent third party, not a so-called expert hired by a Metro District board that is under a conflict of interest. Basically, a need for oversight when the Metro District board members are operating under a conflict of interest in either approving developer reimbursements or are entering into community authority board agreements that have 5 votes for the developer and 1 vote for the homeowners, or entering into intergovernmental agreements in which all the tax money is basically shifted from the Metro District to some other district without any ability to change that, or when issuing Metro District debt or taxes that seems unreasonable. So I saw that in a lot of different directions, but the one thing that really focused is there needs to be some kind of truly independent and realistic oversight into all of that. And I guess the solution that I would have for that, and there's a lot of different ways this could be done. Either it could be done in terms of some type of a monitor, an independent monitor that would be either within the Attorney General's office, perhaps, maybe their Consumer Protection Division. It could be in DOLA. I don't know if DORA is the appropriate place to put it, but I really think it needs to be an independent monitor specific to Metro districts that has a person that has the ability, or a group of people that have the ability to really understand some of the problems that are being submitted. In other words, if a developer submits a reimbursement request that seems unreasonable, this monitor should be able to say, hey, wait a minute, this is unreasonable. This shouldn't be agreed to. If a developer proposes entering into an intergovernmental agreement, which 5 votes is for the developer and only 1 for the homeowners, the monitor should be able to say, hey, this looks unreasonable. So I'd like to see something like that. At least that will provide some kind of oversight or transparency where there is none right now.
Great, thank you, Brian. And Brian, just quick follow-up question. Related to the topics, would you consider that governance, under that governance bullet?
Yeah, I think that, well, it merges a little bit with taxes, but I think it's primarily, yeah.
Okay, and the reason I'm clarifying that is just so that when we file some of this discussion in the report, we're reflecting the right content area. And I think, Joe, your comment too also would be governance related. So thank you very much. Okay, next up, I see Chris Elliott, and then after Chris, we'll go to Jennifer Tanaka. So just so you can be prepared. So Chris, you're up next. What's your one theme that really resonated most with you in this conversation?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. You'll have to excuse me, I'm traveling today, so I'm sitting in a Starbucks and you guys will have to put up with the music and the sound of people making coffee. But I think the thing that I see is the notion of disclosure. And I feel very concerned when a number of people, for a variety of issues, brings up the fact that, well, I didn't know that this occurred, or I didn't know that that occurred. One of the things that we try to do is provide disclosure both in terms of the written document, and then urge people to come to meet and greets to get an idea of how the Metro districts work. But I think maybe there should be a further effort to reach out to the community as it matures and educate people on exactly how these things work. There's a lot of misinformation today, which is, again, is unfortunate that people don't understand how the thing works, what the safeguards are, and what they can do to try and become better educated on what it is that's going on. So my vote would be the broad scope of disclosures, and let's do what we can to try to make them as effective as possible.
Great, thank you, Christopher. So next I'm going to go to Jennifer Tanaka, and then we're going to go to Natasha. So Natasha, you're on deck. Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to everybody who called in, because I think this is really helpful to hear some more perspectives as well. Kind of switching gear, and I agree with what others I've noticed as far as common themes, but just to introduce another one, there's certainly the CAB structure and the governance and accountability where that is concerned. I know that was something that we had talked about in one of our prior meetings as well, and talked about not just CABs, but authorities in general, Title 29 authorities that are created by contract, by and among the various member districts, and making sure that they're held accountable, that there's transparency there, making them subject to some of the same requirements that we have for the underlying member districts. So for example, making sure that the authority has a website, that it has the same information that the districts are required to provide as far as board membership and meetings and audits and budgets and all of that kind of stuff. I think also, and I'm not sure, every CAB is structured differently, every authority is structured differently, but I don't think it would be beyond kind of crazy to require that they all be, if they are a representative of a member district, that they be an elected official of that member district, so that they can be held accountable in their district through an election process. We heard a couple of people mention that they feel that those members can't be voted out of office, but if they are a member of the underlying board, I have an authority where that is the case, where they have to be an elected member of one of the member boards, or three of them, and all three of them have a person that is a designee that is on that, and both the designee and the alternate designee, should the designee not be available, are elected residents that are within those communities, elected board members. And so if they aren't acting the way that they feel would be desirable of them, then they certainly in that district could vote them out of office. So that might be one way. But I think we talked about, having them have their websites and all of that information, have certain filings with the Division of Local Government. None of that is required right now. And so having them follow the same rules for the most part of those underlying districts, I think might be helpful to help bridge some of that gap and provide some accountability there. So that was one add that I had compared to what was already provided.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. All right, next I have Natasha, and after Natasha, I'll have Bert go. So Bert, you're on deck next. All right, Natasha, please go ahead.
And we've touched on this on prior meetings, and I think we heard it from numerous individuals, from Jim Soyland, Jim Gibson, Jason Cassie, and various reiterations in Ms. Larson, of a lot of these abuses stem from this master servant setup. I mean, so to me, the solution is very simple. To have these districts where there are no homeowners that can ever be on. And yeah, we all want that Visa card that we get to go spend and someone else pays the bill. When I look at, I have 7 people really brought that up as the theme. So that structure that disenfranchises the voters who are paying the Visa bill with their tax dollars, it's a simple solution. There's nothing in Title 32 that has ever addressed and really created that master servant setup. And I think the comment that was made by one of our participants today, that there is coercion and harassment, I'll say I personally see that. I live in a district where 4 of directors, including myself, have faced being banished from the ski hill and the golf and the restaurant and the sidewalks. We had a director on our board resign after 1 meeting. It has a chilling effect. So again, I find there's a pretty simple solution here. This was not created by Title 32. It seems to be the common thread that so many people testified about today. So that would be my observation.
Great. Thank you, Natasha. All right, Bert, you're up next. And after Bert, we're going to go to Mary Ann. So go ahead, Bert.
Yeah, I want to basically reiterate Brian Matisse's recommendation with regards to an independent an independent oversight person who's there. I like that idea and I would support it. In addition, I think that what we heard mostly from a lot of people like Jim Solon, Jim Gibson, and Dina Frank, Jason Cassie, was the undemocratic nature of the Metro District system. And I think that that's something that's resonated with me, that there's no notice that you belong to a Metro District. When you buy the property, there should be mandatory notice with regards to it, as well as mandatory disclosure of the Metro District and what they mean. It also seems to me, I like Natasha's reference to the fact that getting your visa bill paid by somebody else is everybody's dream. And I think it's unfair. And I think that we need to address that in Title 32 as well.
Great. Thank you, Bert. All right, we're going to go to Marianne next. And after Marianne, we're going to have Representative Parenti. So again, what theme really resonated the most with you? What solution or new thoughts insights do you have based on public comment? And Marianne, the floor is yours.
Just one thing.
Well, we'll be able to go around again. So just hold on to it.
Okay, yeah, because it's kind of hard to slice and dice because I was taking notes and have so many different thoughts here, but okay, so I'll save some of this for later. You're saying we get another go round.
We'll have another go. Yes, I promise.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I think the one that resonated with me the most was the thought or references to things like taxation without representation. And I think when you listen to the different speakers, including, I think he was near the last speaker who was frustrated down in BLR because the developer was going back to the county to get a change in land use and they wanted a change in amenities. And I think that kind of underscores the point that I'm about to make, which is it's the city, the town, or the county that approves the service plan, sets the depth authorization, and then decides as they approve the zoning, the plat, the site plans, what the improvements are, whether they're offsite or onsite. So it's not the developer unilaterally making those decisions. It's not a visa or a checkbook that they get to whip out and just unilaterally use. They're building the things in the sequence that the land use jurisdiction requires. So it is the county, the city, the municipality who's making that decision. In terms of the taxation part, it's also decided ahead of time in the service plan, what the limits of the debt issuance would be. But I think more importantly is the focus on the mill levy limitation term and the debt mill levy caps that are in the service plans, because the amount of cost that you're going to have is going to vary over time. The jurisdiction's requirements as the project goes through phase are going to change, and the costs related to those requirements are going to change. But the limits on what the district can tax for payment of debt and the limits on how long it can on residential is a part of almost every service plan. And I think now we have new service plan requirements that went into effect through the legislature last session. So that boundary is there. And so I think that to say it's taxation without representation is really not accurate. Again, because those who are voted in, the county, the city, the town, who are there at the beginning of the project and implement the land use plan as it goes, that the developers have to respond to as they're asking the districts to make these improvements, that's what they need. And so I agree with, in terms of solutions, are we talking solutions now or just?
Yes,
specific
solution you might offer, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, because and again, looking at the authority structure, it is a tough balancing act that is currently in place where with an authority structure, you have multiple member districts and you have transitions. And I had said in the last, I think it was our last meeting, that I would go and take a dive into all the different establishment agreements to see, do they have transition points? And it seemed to me, looking at all of them that I saw, there are different transition processes. So in some, each member district has one vote, and the phases of the development occur within those different districts. And so over time, whether it's a resident board, because of it's a part of a residential development area, or it's a commercial district board, over time, they take on the appointment of who a representative is from their elected officials, and then natural transition occurs. as the development occurs. But you don't have representatives of any one subset of the community stopping the future development because of that structure. So you do have transition, but you do have completion of the development that was approved by the city, county, or the town and financed the way the service plan says that it can be. Another structure that I saw was the coordinating district notion. And on the coordinating district, you'll have developer nominees on the board, and that entity will have more votes than any one of the other members. However, there's a trigger event in every one of those establishment agreements, so that when you reach build out, or you reach a certain assessed valuation level, or you finish completion of financing and construction of improvements, and it's described differently in each agreement, but the point is that you don't have full transition until you get completed what the service plan required. And I think that looking at the concern of those who invest into and buy bonds from districts that need that future build out and future phases to be successful, to take away the certainty that and transition the way the authority structures currently provide it, would mean that you will not have master plan development communities begin. Another thing is, you don't even know when you're putting those authorities together sometimes what the full improvements are going to be of on-site and off-sites. And that is the nature of a master plan community, and a huge community. But I would come back to the limitations in the mill levy limitation terms, and the debt mill levy limits puts a boundary around what the residents and the commercial property owners are going to have to pay for in those circumstances, and shift the risk of increasing costs and demands to the bondholders and the developer, which is, where it should be, and was shifted there back in 1992. So what I think in solutions would be the case, helpful, as Jennifer had described, and I won't repeat it because we've all heard it, but best practices. And when I dug in again into the different authorities, it seems like most of them are already doing it, but it doesn't hurt to put it in the statute so it's done in a uniform way, which is to take whatever those requirements are that their member districts have to comply with, and go ahead and put that in statute for authorities to have to comply with. In terms of an oversight body, I don't think that that's constructive, because again, it's the local authorities, the cities, towns, and counties that know what the infrastructure requirements are, know the need and level of flexibility that's needed to finance over time, and puts the level of oversight. Some of them have, let's see your finance plans before you issue debt. Some say, let's see your documents before you issue debt. Some say, go forth and have an external financial advisor or a cost verifier. Every jurisdiction decides it differently, and because they know what's needed in their community, I think that's the best place to leave it.
All right, Marianne, thank you. And I know you have more. We'll come back around. Don't worry. Just for the purposes of the report, would you say this is more related to tax levy? If you had to put it in a box, tax levying practices and authority versus governance, just so that we're going to do our best to align the comments with those.
I think governance. I think.
You think governance? Okay. I know it's tough. They've crossed lines. I know, but all right. Well, then governance. Perfect. All right, so after Marianne, I had Representative Parenti, and after Representative Parenti, I'm going to go to Barry Wilson. So just want to give Barry that heads up that he'll be after our Representative Parenti. So go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks to all the members for being here for this discussion. I think for me, of course, I heard some of the same themes that most of you did. I really keyed in on the conflicts of interest and the lack of accountability that homeowners are seeing. I want to comment in the context of the previous speakers, of Marianne's comments, and just note that while I do think that we have made some really good legislative changes recently, many of those were not retroactive. And so they're applying to new metro districts, but they're not going back and putting new rules on the metro districts that are already in place. Some of them did, some of them don't. And so I do think that there's a lot of service plans out there, for instance, that don't have the safeguards that new service plans would get. And so I think for me, the biggest theme that I want to explore, and I'm not sure I have the answers, is how do we remedy the metro districts that are out there that people feel stuck in, that they can't get out of, that they can't fix the governance structures of, that they can't get the service plans changed so that they can start limiting, some of that, those tax issuance rules and so forth. And so I'm really interested in exploring that space of what we can do to even get the older metro districts to comply with our more modern senses of best practices in this area. And I look forward to your thoughts on that. And I do appreciate Ms. Tanaka's comments and thoughts on the cab structure. I thought that was helpful. Thank you.
Great. So Representative, we'll get back to that question around how to modernize existing. We'll get to that after we hear from everybody else, and then we'll have a chance for another round for everyone. All right. So I've got Barry up next, and then after Barry, we'll go to Commissioner Odoricio. So Barry, there you are. Yep, you are on. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Yeah, a lot of these things resonate with me, especially, you know, the Visa card thing where someone's shopping with someone else's money. Often, I think residents do feel that way. In Windsor, we had the lack of transparency and accountability was a big one. We actually made some changes to our service plan, but it's like the person before me just said, it was not retroactive. Windsor may be a smallish type of town, but we
Barry, I apologize for the interruption. Could you come just a little closer to your screen? Because I know I'm having a hard time hearing you, and I think others might be as well. Want to make sure we hear you. Yes.
Is that better?
It is a little better. Yes. Thank you. Sorry about that.
I'm not sure what's going on. Sorry about that. Now, I said, you know, a lot of these things resonate with me, especially sometimes it feels like somebody's shopping with a Visa card and the residents are having to pay back the bill. But in Windsor, we changed our service plan to improve transparency and accountability and some other items that have been discussed. But we already had over 30 service or metro districts in town, and it only applied to the new ones that we've added recently. So nothing is retroactive. But if I looked at all these things, if I had to pick one thing, it really comes down to what Brian Matisse brought up is having some kind of oversight, because we can make all the regulations and rules in the world, but unless there's some oversight to enforce it, it's probably not going to work. I know it's frustrating being on city council when people come to you with concerns and you really have no way to help them. So that's it for me. Oversight would be my number one thing.
Excellent. Thank you, Barry. Good comments on that. All right, next we are going to go to Commissioner Odoricio, and after Commissioner Odoricio, we're going to go to Dr. Davis. So just want to put Dr. Davis on notice that she'll be on after our commissioner. So go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. And listening to some of the folks, the homeowners, I think it's very clear that we have a lack of trust out there and understanding. And I don't say that as in shame on them for not having understanding. This is complex. And then when you add the complexity of any sort of real estate transaction to then having to try to understand and then participate in the complexity of potentially different layers of new governmental and or organizations that impact their quality of life and their finances, I think we need to clarify the different types of metro districts, the different tasks and obligations and duties, and then be able to identify in a better way the different types of entities that are out there. I think it's very confusing for some folks to have a metro district on one hand that serves as like an traditional HOA type functions. And then the next time the metro district serves as like a financing mechanism. Then the next time you've got cabs and other types of districts that kind of also serve as those, but with questionable transparency or complexities that are causing some concerns here, like that were expressed earlier. I do want to caution against what could be deemed to or be interpreted as a triangulation to dump it all on the local governments to be now having oversight into the day-to-day activities of private communities. And so I'm going to push against that and say that that is not, I think we clarify the role of the government, but not add to it, because what will happen eventually, and I think you're already starting to see it, some local governments are like, this is new development. New development has to pay its way, and the people who sign up, meaning purchase homes, need to have enough understanding through transparency and enough participation through governance and enough assurance through accountability that they understand what they're getting into, they can participate it, and they can make sure that it's being done the right way. And I'd like to clarify local government's role as we discuss oversight, but not dump it in the laps of local government to now having to start to micromanage neighborhoods. And I think that's where it could go if we're not careful. And I will tell you that there will be a lot of local governments just simply say, we won't approve these anymore if this is if you're gonna just shove that burden in. Right now, local governments are feeling it. They're feeling it from the legislature. They're feeling it from private enterprise. And the triangulation is happening everywhere. And local governments are doing the best they can with the resources they have. And given the fact that the state continues to try to pull some of those resources and some of the authorities and only give us different burdens with a lot of micromanaging and mandates is not going to be the way to handle this situation. And I would ask that private enterprise remember that too. So there has to be get back to the transparency and accountability. And I would say that goes back to governance.
Excellent. And I appreciate you summing up those themes for the report so we can file those into those two categories. I appreciate that, Commissioner. All right, and our last task force member that we will hear from is Dr. Davis. Dr. Davis, go ahead and share your thoughts on themes that resonated most with you and any particular specific solutions that come to mind. Dr. Davis, I'm not sure if you're trying to unmute or not, but we cannot hear you. All right, we'll certainly come back to Dr. Davis if she'd like to chime in. I promised everyone we'd circle around again. We absolutely will, but I think Representative Parenti had a really specific question that she had wanted to have some discussion on, and that was just concerning the some of these policies and new laws and requirements that apply for new districts going forward, but really more concerned about existing districts that people might reside in. So Representative Parenti, can you repeat your question for the group? Because I'd love to have, we have a lot of smart people on this task force, and it sounds like you're really looking for some very specific feedback on that particular question. So go ahead and share that with the group, and then we'll open up some conversation, and then we'll go back to do our second round with everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think the gist of the question is, what can we do to help homeowners who feel like they are in metro districts now that are operating under an older set of rules, that have exempted themselves from Tabor, that still have developer controlled boards, that have documents in place that allow all of that to happen. It's all legal, but they don't want to live there anymore. And it's hard to sell. What we hear is that it's hard for them to move because it's hard for them to sell that home now that those problems have been exposed. And so what can we do to help them remedy, kind of cure their situations, to just level the playing field maybe, or maybe get a little bit more potentially oversight? What are the ideas to fix the metro districts that are already in place?
All right, is there anyone who would like to jump in with some initial thoughts on that? All right, Jennifer, you jumped right in. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm probably not going to provide any type of solution because I don't know what the answer is, to be quite frank. And I think that it's not cookie cutter, right? Because you have some developments that are operating great under their confines. You have others that have perceived violations. I think what's hard is I think there's a perception that you can say, well, all developers need to get off the board at X time frame. I can tell you how hard it is for me and a vast majority of my districts to find people willing to serve on the board, where the developer doesn't want to be on, but they stay on just so that we have a board. They're not cookie cutter. That's what's a little bit hard. So I think it's hard retroactively to go back and say, okay, we're going to put on, well, you couldn't on some of it. You couldn't go back and say, we're going to put a 50 mil cap on all districts that are in existence now for their debt. Well, what do you do about debt that's already outstanding, that already has pledges, those types of things. So while we have some of those protections in place for new districts, which I think is great for having those requirements in the service plan, how to retroactively do that, I'll noodle on that myself to see if I can think of ways. I just don't know. I know that we struggled with that with disclosure. In 262 in 21, we had the disclosure for new sales, for new residential sales, that we can require builders to provide that upfront at the time people are signing their contract, so that they know before money goes hard what they're getting into. We really struggled with how do you get notice to people for resales, because you have realtors who don't want to have liability or don't fully understand everything. It takes a lot of time and effort to kind of go research that themselves. You have homeowners that may not have the sophistication to provide the same information. You don't want to have homeowners on the hook for liability if they don't provide accurate information or whatnot of a resale. What we settled on that was in 110 last year was, okay, for the resale, they're going to have to provide at least notice that they're in a district and the website. So then that person that's buying it can then go to the website and get the information and say, okay, I can go get the budget, I can get the audit, I can find out who the manager is, I can find out who the directors are, and they can get that information directly. But for them to provide the same type of disclosure that's required under 262, which is much beefier, where it has calculations and all this kind of stuff, really puts an onus on a resident who's trying to resell. So we've struggled with that ourselves in the industry, with trying to figure out some ways to get some information out there. But in those same bills, we do have it applied to many of the existing districts when it comes to websites or annual reports and those types of things. They do trigger back. Now, granted, it goes back to 2000, and that was really intended to capture the districts that seem to fall within the areas that people were having concern. I think all of those that called in today are all in districts that are newer than 2000. So they would be required to meet those requirements. And so I feel like at least there were some of those requirements are retroactive, but when it comes to modifying a constitutional document essentially for that district, I don't mean capital C constitutional, but lowercase c constitutional document for that particular district, where it has their powers, their limitations, their confines, their guardrails, how to go back and change that without creating insanity and a bunch of contractual violations and breaches and pandemonium on existing debt, etc. I think we can put our heads together and see if we can. I certainly will commit to seeing if I can noodle on some of that and whatnot. But I do know that that's been a struggle. I think it's a fair comment and request. I just don't know how to accomplish it. Without creating a whole bunch of litigation, quite frankly. So that's all I have to add. No solutions, but those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, Brian, I saw your hand up, so please go ahead.
Thank you. And I agree with Jennifer Tanaka that some of these are going to be difficult because unfortunately, like for example, once bonds are issued to third parties, innocent third parties, it's very difficult to retroactively say, oops, we shouldn't have issued those bonds. The mill levies were too high or the debt was too high. That's going to be a problem. But I do have 3 ideas, and I think these may help. Number one, I think the legislature, similar to what they have done in the HOA or the common interest community context, it has the ability to declare that certain types of practices or contracts are contrary to public policy and therefore cannot be enforced. For example, an unfair community authority board agreement in which a developer district gets 5 votes and the homeowner districts get 1 vote each. You declare that disproportionate voting like that is unfair and therefore cannot be enforced. Secondly, I think that with regard to homeowners being able to serve on boards where there are existing board members that were appointed by developers because there were no homeowners. I know that Representative Tammy Story a couple of years ago, well then she was Senator Tammy Story, introduced a proposed legislation that provided that in the event that there are homeowners that there were board members who qualified through the loophole, the exception in 32.1, I believe it was 32.1808, for where there were no eligible electors in order to fill a board seat, they had to qualify someone through these purchase contracts. The provision was once there was a homeowner who requested and qualified and was willing to serve on the board, and that gets around Ms. Tanaka's suggestion that there are no homeowners willing to serve. If there are homeowners willing to serve, at that point, those individuals who qualified through that loophole must now step down. So that's one possibility. The third possibility, I think, of maybe providing some relief is, this past legislative session, the legislature attempted to provide tax relief because there was a dramatic increase in assessed valuation because property values went up so much. This had the interesting consequence that for newer metro districts, all of that tax relief, because their service plans typically provided that the maximum mill levy is automatically adjusted upward whenever the legislature reduces the residential assessment rate or reduces the formula for computing taxes. I think the legislature has the ability, when it grants tax relief, in the context of a dramatic increase in assessed value. In other words, we're not talking about where the legislature is reducing the amount of taxing authority, but instead what it's doing is it's preventing the tax levies from increasing beyond an inflationary rate. That perhaps those adjustments are contrary to public policy and should not be implemented in those situations. This way, at least there's some tax relief that can be provided without reducing the overall taxes that are collected by the district from a prior year.
Great, thank you, Brian. And so again, we're responding to Representative Parenti's question. So I see Natasha and Commissioner Odorizio's hands up. So we'll go to Natasha and then Commissioner, and then we'll go back and circle around to the full group again for additional themes they want to talk about. So Natasha, go ahead.
I'm going to give a big ditto to Brian's comments. I think all three of those measures would prove to provide meaningful protections for homeowners, and really addressing what Jennifer Tanaka is talking about. I think we need to look at the fact that on paper, it looks great that yes, the service plans and the authorized debt are voted in, they're approved by the towns. But again, it's what we've talked about in a prior meeting, and I don't know, Representative Parenti, how we get around that. I mean, I watched a hearing at our town council where the developer promised 300 homes within 3 years and 60 million of debt. But when you have smaller communities with not very sophisticated board members, those promises sound good, they approve it. And, one thing that would be not retroactive, but I think bring the educational piece that Representative Parenti brought up is very clear designations of which offices are being held, which directorships are being held by developer affiliates and employees. And, again, some of these protections look really pretty on paper, but the reality is service plans are changed, oftentimes out of necessity because there isn't enough mill levy and a district is facing defaulting on a bond debt. So on paper, some of these protections sound good, but they're not really. And same with the transition. And I don't know how we address that, Jennifer. Yes, there's a transition at build out, but when you look at these master plan communities, the build out of my community will be long after I'm dead. So that doesn't really allow any meaningful homeowner participation. So
Great.
Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Natasha. All right, Commissioner, go ahead.
All right. Permission to ask a question of some of the technical folks in order to help me kind of get to the.
Definitely.
I would ask Jennifer and Mary Ann, because I know you guys work in this area a lot. It's my understanding that we've always had, and when I say always, my question is how long have we had this? The ability for local governments to do the three main things, and I need your help understanding the role of local governments before the most recent reforms. Number one, approval of the service area, the service plan. Number two, the quinquennial review. Number 3, the annual receipt and disclosure of the annual disclosures. What other roles did and do the cities and counties have prior to the additional reforms that Rep. Parenti was referring to?
If I understand, your first question was, what year did service plans begin to be approved? It was in the 1960s.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of always been there. So that covers that function of the local government, kind of covers even the stuff that Rep. Parenti's worried about.
Yeah, and after the 1960s, when the Title 32 was recreated, let's see, that's when they recodified all the district statutes to make it consistent what all the rules were that applied to all organizing districts for different kinds of purposes. That was 1981. And then districts that had, a couple of years later, the statute was changed again. So if you were a pre-service plan district, if you existed in the 40s and the 50s, because there were districts organized in the 40s and the 50s, frankly, going back to the 1800s, then when the state was codified, you had to file a statement of purposes. So, and a statement of purposes can't be modified, frankly, falls within the same category of material modification, Steve. So if you're a district and you file your statement of purposes and say, I'm doing A, B, C, and D, and then you try to do F, then you have a material modification event, just like a district that has a service plan after 61 or 81. 65 or 81. Does that help?
Yeah, so the very old stuff is covered by statement of purposes, and the newer, since 1980s, are covered by the initial service plan submission and approval by the local government, correct?
Correct.
Then the next question is the quinquennial review. What is that? What's the purpose of that? And what can a city or county do based on that?
Jennifer, you want to take that one, or you want me to?
Go ahead, Mary Ann.
Okay,
that is required to do a quinquennial report, and so I'll let you. I don't know if you've had any that have gone through that.
I have, and they're so fun. And what a quinquennial review is when every, now I'm going to get it wrong, every 5 years, I think it is, after you've last had an election, and every 5 years after that, the jurisdiction can request that the district file a report on what services it's providing, what kind of debt it has outstanding, and basically how it's living under the requirements of its service plan. And if in that quinquennial review, the determination is of the jurisdiction that service plan needs to be amended or modified, it's totally in the discretion of the jurisdiction to do that, it can do so. So we've done that. We've had quinquennial reviews in Weld County. We've had some in Castle Rock. Off the top of my head, that's all I can remember.
I have one in Aurora, but that tells you how old that district is.
Okay.
Because it's no longer required under their model, but it is under the older pre-2004 districts required.
Can I chime in here? Because I think it's a really important question, because again, on paper, the quinquennial sounds really good, and our town actually has done 2 for metro districts in our community. And again, there's 3 choices. You look at it and say, great, here's your debt, here's your service plan, everything's hunky-dory, great. Or you say, no, it doesn't align, you're too far in debt, the projections don't match, you need to amend the service plan or make adjustments. Or 3, the remaining authorized but unissued debt goes away. So again, on paper, it sounds like a great check and balance. The reality is we're talking about a statute that most town board members are not that familiar with. What happened in the town where I live is the attorney came up with a 4th option of, oh yeah, no, the district can't in any way, shape, or form meet its obligations, but we'll just lower the authorized debt to a random, I think it was 7 million. And again, without an understanding of the statute and proper legal guidance, suddenly the town board votes on this 4th option that doesn't exist in the statute. So again, it's a really great question, Commissioner Ordoricio. That should be providing checks and balances. That's just not the reality that I'm seeing.
Yeah, and
I've heard about the same problem elsewhere.
So I appreciate that, and that's why, if I might continue,
Yes,
my question would be, how many metro districts are covered by that requirement?
All of them are what the statute provides is that if it's requested, then by the local government that it has to be provided. So any local government can request it at any point in time. It's not required to be provided unilaterally or at the urging of the district, but it's at the request of that local government.
Exactly. So it covers most of the ones that Representative Parenti is concerned about, some of those that she's seeking for retroactive coverage and some help. My next question, third, and then I'm going to come up with an idea. That's what I'm getting at, everyone. So just bear with me. The third task that involves local governments, and I need to know if there's more, is that we receive like an annual report or disclosure. And it's pretty high level stuff. What is included in that? And what is the purpose of that? And what are local governments supposed to and could do with that information? The annual. I'm specifically asking about the annual.
Right. So the annual report is a concept that's been in Title 32 for a long time. Again, at the request of the local jurisdiction, if they wanted to have that. I would say over the last 25 years, most jurisdictions in the service plan require an annual report, and that sets forth the items that that particular jurisdiction would like to see in the report. Generally, you see the budget, you see the audit, you see any boundary changes. Sometimes it'll include what kind of IGAs were entered into, any litigation, any defaults on the bonds, that type of information. In 262, Senate Bill 262 in 2001, this was codified to make it, one, a requirement on an annual basis, and two, to standardize the information that's included. Prior to Senate Bill 262, it was just whatever that jurisdiction wanted, but there was not a consistency with a basic level of information that had to be put into that report. And so now what you see is statutorily, you have the boundary changes, IGAs entered into or terminated, access information for the rules and regs, summary of litigation, status of construction of public improvements, list of facilities constructed by the district that were conveyed or dedicated to the county or muni, final AV, copy of the budget, the audit, the notice of any uncured default, any ability of the district to pay its obligations. In addition to that, those that are now statutorily required for all metropolitan districts to provide on an annual basis, post on the website, send out a bunch of different agencies. The local jurisdiction can also require additional information still. So you still have a lot of jurisdictions that'll maybe have whatever particular information they would like in addition to that. Maybe they want a map, or maybe they want to have a copy of the bond documents or something that they specifically are interested in. Then that district is still obligated under its service plan to provide that information in addition to the statutorily required. So getting to going back to your same point on the quinquennial report is, one, now it's not up to the local jurisdiction whether they want it, they're getting it whether they want it or not. And two, they can require additional information as well if they want a deeper dive or want to expand the scope of that report.
All right. Thank you. If you might, Rep. Rennie, if you give me just a minute, I'm kind of wrapping this up. Those are three pretty important steps. How do you get into the process at the beginning? A periodic review, like where it's actual more in-depth, which is that quinquennial review. And I just love saying quinquennial, but it's the quinquennial review. And then the third is the annual reports. Now, in government, I learned, because what we were trying to do was bolster the local government's ability to make those more meaningful, because what Natasha was mentioning is actually true. And so what we could do within the control that we had is change our policy. As of right now, local governments can change their policy to say, we want to make this more meaningful. What we did in Adams County is say that we're going to hire a municipal advisor who would be a fiduciary to do the upfront, an analysis and make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, or maybe it's the City Council, have an expert who understands this stuff at that level of detail. So it's not a county employee having to constantly go through these over and over again. I mean, we're talking about dozens or hundreds of these, right? In some of these jurisdictions. So we did this, and we were going to charge the Metro District to cover the cost of that person who's supposed to be a third party, kind of like a fiduciary who's who's not beholden, not conflicted in either way for either the government or for the builders, or the Metro District, I should say, I'm sorry. And then we came across that there might be some statutory limitations on how much we can charge. So Rep. Perenni, if you could write this down. One of the challenges that we're having in being able to turn the existing processes into as effective as we can is the potential limitation on us to be able to pass that cost on to the Metro District to conduct that review. So we can hire on a per basis to hire somebody to do that analysis. The other thing that we haven't talked about that I hear over and over again in these conversations is the lack of participation, transparency, and accountability. But with those three steps, the initial statement of purpose or service plan approval, the quinquennial review, and the annual reports. You know, one thing that we can do in local government, and I would ask Representative Perenni to maybe like as we're talking here, I'm not trying to tell Rep. Perenni to do it, but I'm saying like one thing we can do is allow local government to actually create our own advisory board for every single neighborhood or every metro district that is consisted of citizens to participate in this process, because you don't want every city council and every single county commissioner going into level of detail on every single one of these metro districts and every single one of these neighborhoods. But what we can do is delegate the analysis. So let's play it out. You have neighborhood, I don't know, we have neighborhood XYZ. Okay. We have at neighborhood XYZ, they have a metro district. And instead of asking, because I know some folks say, well, that's up to the local government. It's up to in order for us to maximize the existing oversight that exists, we need to be able to hire, even on an as-needed basis, an expert to look at that analysis and give the board or county commission, to give the city council the information they need on what they recommend if they see problems with service debt, if they see that there should be some amendments or modifications, or they see that the things are in trouble. What I'm saying is I'm asking two things. Number one, give us the authority to pass along that cost to that metro district as they do the upfront, that one-time service plan at the front, but also the quinquennial. Okay, it may be like a bigger project up front, but every quinquennial. And if we establish and we say we're going to create an advisory board for neighborhood XYZ, Metro District XYZ, it's going to consist of these 5 citizens that are actual homeowners in that area who will help analyze what that expert that we've now hired to come in, and they will sit there and they will go through that level of detail. And what this does, it would allow the citizens or the owners to have access to that level of detail with somebody who does not have any sort of conflict of interest with the builders or the Metro District or even the government. And then they come to us just like it would. And it does not necessarily have to even be a hearing, but it could be, here's the recommendation that we approve. But by that time, what we've got is the decision that I'm making, I know has been vetted by an expert who doesn't have a conflict of interest. That cost is now covered because we're able to charge the Metro District for that cost as like a fee or an the application fee or whatever for this transaction or whatever we're going to call it, this process. And then third, we know that regardless of whatever's happening in that metro district, we've actually had people who are property owners that are participants because I'm the one who appointed them. My team appointed them to do this. And now you've got participation and transparency. And so all those things that those homeowners may not be able to do because they can't get a seat on that metro board, they can have and get a seat on the board that I appoint them to give me a recommendation as to what kind of changes or what additional information we need. And so that's an idea I'm asking based on the information today is give local governments the authority to be able to cover the cost of that additional person and to assign advisory boards as needed for any metro district that we choose. And if the citizens of a particular neighborhood come to us and say, we would like to have an advisory board for this, I'm going to say, great, because if I don't, now I'm going to have to get staff to dive into the details to look into this, or I'm going to look, or some local governments are just going to look the other way and not have that. So let's empower the folks who are most concerned about these metro districts to get that transparency so they can push us to help them with accountability, utilizing the tools that already exist. And so that's what I'm proposing based on what we've talked about.
All right. Representative Parenti, that's a lot to unpack. How are you feeling about getting your answer? Did you get an answer to your question?
I think I did, but you know, as such conversations do, and this is a good sign, it prompted more questions. So, you know, for Commissioner Odorizio, thank you for all of that. Not sure about the statute on fees, so that's something we can certainly look at. I would say that I don't think that there's anything that the state needs to do for you to put an advisory board of citizens together. Our local governments do that all the time, right? Like I know the town of Erie just put one together on, I don't know, oh, the landfill, right? Landfill task force, you know, lots of different things. You can put those, you can gather groups of citizens to talk to you about issues all the time. But what that got me thinking about is a question back to you as a member of a local government. What are the consequences for a metro district that just is not following its service plan? You can obviously try to tailor it, but is there any kind of enforcement mechanism if a service plan is not followed? Because I would imagine that once a metro district is a few years in the creation, no one's going to want to back away from that, right? Like the houses are built, but if the infrastructure is not there, if the service plan is not being followed, and this is not for those of you in the industry, this is not an accusatory statement. It's really a question trying to, like, what happens to a metro district that doesn't follow a service plan? I don't even know the answer. And what could a local government do other than try to modify the plan? But if they're not following the service plan, what does that even mean?
And that is, this is a Marianne and Jennifer question that was answered earlier. So Jennifer, you have your hand up actually, because I know your answer.
Yeah, I was gonna call on Jennifer because it looked like she had an answer.
Yeah, and I think that Marianne and I could probably tag team this, but I think it depends on what kind of violation you're talking about. I mean, if you have a situation where a district is issuing debt and they're exceeding their debt mill levy, you're going to come sue my office because we issued an opinion that you didn't need to have any more governmental approvals in order to do that. You're going to look at bond counsel. You're going to look at those that are involved in that transaction to say, you signed off on this deal and said that everything was in place in order to issue this debt, and the district did it anyway, and it's in violation of its service plan. That's probably the biggest thing. That's why when it comes to issuing debt, those of us that are general counsel, we're going through to make sure that all of those T's are crossed and those I's are dotted to make sure that we're in compliance with that service plan. Bond counsel does the same thing. If you're talking about the construction of improvements, that really falls down to the land use approval side and the developer agreements and outside the district purview, if you will. We are not tied to a particular, the district shall construct this particular improvement by 2027. And if it doesn't, that, you know, there are penalties there. It's really, the district is a funding mechanism that can construct and can finance that, but we're dependent upon the underlying land use approvals, development agreements, all of the phasing, all of the subdivision improvement agreements, those types of things that are at the land use level side between the developer, the builder, and the city or the county that's involved. And so they look at the phasing out of those improvements. They have those obligations. They strike deals and annexation agreements, for example, that, you know, that they will install a park. The district, they can then work with the district for the district construct that park and to finance that park, but it's not the district's obligation to do that in accordance with that annexation agreement unless the district is a party to that particular agreement. So those are a little bit sticky because that really falls to the local government to enforce it with the developer or the builder pursuant to those agreements, those contractual arrangements. And if they've put in some of those triggers, then that's where you have a contractual claim that they could certainly go after the builder or the developer in those instances, but that's really outside of the district. I'm trying to think of what other violations that you're thinking of, Representative Parenti, under the service plan. Just kind of any, yeah. So I think then it kind of goes back to what Commissioner Odorizio's point is that then the local jurisdiction can say, listen, we don't feel like, maybe the district's been out there for 20 years, hasn't done a thing, and is really stagnant. And they say, listen, you have this district out there that hasn't done anything. Let's modify it so that it actually comes up with current development plans. That would be one way under the quinquennial review process. You also have districts that aren't doing anything that the DLG, quite frankly, can administratively dissolve because it says you're doing nothing. You've been sitting out there. You're stagnant. We don't want to have proliferation of local governments out there. So we're going to go ahead and dissolve you. And that has happened on occasion. It's not super common, but it does happen. I've actually had several of them that have gone through that process. So those are ones I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know if Marianne, if you have others that I'm not thinking of.
I'm struggling to understand exactly. I don't know if Representative Peretti, if you want to give some suggestions on what districts are doing in your hypothetical that wouldn't be in conformance with the service plan. I think you're on mute. There you go.
I was just thinking back to some of the testimony that we heard today, you know, that, for instance, amenities were promised that were never delivered.
Okay.
You know, what are the enforcement mechanisms that exist for something like that? I wouldn't even know where to begin.
Perfect. I understand that question. Thank you. As I say, like Jennifer, there's a whole bunch of possibilities. So when, as Jennifer was saying, the land use process is what usually in most jurisdictions dictates the timing on when improvements need to be installed. And so the district is organized and the districts that come together and form authorities are organized to follow that land use process. And so if the jurisdiction says the park has to be built before the 500th building permit, then the park has to be built. If the district doesn't have the money to finance it at that point in time, that the county or city or town is going to require by the developer to get that next building permit or to get the next CO, or is going to stop building entirely until that amenity is built. So it's that way with roads, water, sewer, everything. I go back to, what is it, Senate Bill 35, I guess we all refer to it as, but it has to do with the platting requirements and the fact that when you buy a house, it's got to have a road and water line and sewer line. And it's kind of that statute that the counties go to, and the home rule cities have their own requirements on it, but they're all the same. They don't want anybody to buy a lot that doesn't have access water, sewer, drainage, etc. Well, they piggyback on those same requirements for the amenities. So what I'm saying is I heard the comments made by the speakers about amenities not being there when they expected them to be. Those would be, again, triggered by the requirements of the county. And if the district didn't have the funding to do it, if the county had required it, then it's the developer who needs to advance that money to make those improvements happen. And then the district would reimburse, or in their case, the authority would reimburse. Is that responsive to your question? Yeah, I mean, that's how it works. So, I mean, and Commissioner Odoricio could probably comment on that because he's on the land use side of it, or Chris Elliott could because he's on the builder side of it. But it's sitting in the district seat. That's what I've seen for 42 years.
I just want to break in real quickly, because I do want to make sure we have a chance to hear from Brian. So, Chris, do you have a quick response to that question? Christopher, did you want to just provide a quick response to that question? And then I want to go to Brian. Oh, you're on mute. We've lost Chris. That's all right. Brian, do you want to go ahead? We'll get Chris back in a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, one other thing, Representative Peretti, that you should be aware of is there is a provision already in Title 32 that allows the approving municipality or county to go to the court that authorized the creation of the district and declare that there has been a material modification of the service plan. In the statute, a material modification of the service plan is limited to something that essentially significantly changes in some way or deviates in some way from the service plan. When the service plan is originally created, the authorizing authority can specify that certain improvements have to be done in a certain time period, and if bonds are issued inconsistent with that it's a material modification of the service plan, just FYI. But there is a provision they can go to court. They rarely, if ever, do, but they have the ability to do that.
Great. And then, Commissioner, did you have a follow-up comment?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that up front, I put them in the teeth. If you see the comments I made, that the local teeth and I was taking notes as Jennifer and Marianne were talking, is number one is the land use. And so when we approve certain communities, there may or may not be, depending on the level of the requirements, certain amenities that are in there, like a park or, curb gutters and sidewalks. What we may not always require is that they open up a coffee shop. Now, if the builders said that they're going to open up a coffee shop or they're going to have commercial development, we may or may not require that upfront in land use. But if there are promises that are made in the land use process, we can enforce that, but we need to know what those are. And then number two, if promises are made in the Metro District process, that's where I'm suggesting that the quinquennial review and the annual reporting, as well as what Brian Matisse said as maybe an ad hoc action by the local government, could be the teeth or the actions that could be taken. In order for us to be able to do that, it's only fair that the county or city is able to have the Metro District itself cover the costs of that oversight to be able to help, so we can pass on and say we're going to hire somebody to facilitate the review of this very detailed information. And number two, that we're going to be able to facilitate citizen like a board or meeting. But right now, we've got a lot of folks trying to pull some of our powers and things in land use and pull some of our funding that's going towards this. We will not be able to do this, that I'm suggesting that could maybe get done, unless you are able to confirm that we have the power to collect the fee that it costs to cover the cost of that process for a bolster the actual application and exercise of the existing oversight things. But I think our answer will be that we could do that with those older Metro districts that you're referring to, maybe with the same tools that we have. We just need help being able to pull those triggers and be able to use those tools.
And a quick question for you, Commissioner, and maybe it was atypical, but when White Bear Ankly set up our district, the town already got 10% of our bond proceeds. Would those not be really the funds that could be used to fund the overview? I like your idea of the overview. I think it's a really good, nice check and balance. And maybe these 9 districts are an anomaly, but the town that authorized our district already gets 10% of the bond proceeds issued.
I don't know the specifics of your town and where that money goes and what it's used for. So I wouldn't be able to comment on that. And then Jennifer Tanaka, I'll want to let her talk about it, but I see that counties need to have powers that the legislation gives us. We don't necessarily have the same powers that the cities do, particularly those cities. So if you want us to act like a city with some of these other powers, you got to give us the power. And even if you think we have it, clarify it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was going to say, so Natasha, I think on some of the, each city and county is a little bit different from what they exact from the district as far as revenue. A lot of them want it to supplement maintenance for roads, for example. So they'll take over the ownership of roads that the district can finance, but they want to help to supplement some of the revenues for the maintenance of that road or capital replacement long term, because eventually that road will have to have repairs and it'll have to have replacement and stuff like that. So some jurisdictions will require that you have an annual mill levy that you impose, and that revenue goes over to the city or the county or whichever jurisdiction in order to use it for those purposes. Some of them will require, instead of that you build a certain facility. Everybody's a little bit different on how they use that and what kind of funds that they're requiring. If they're requiring bond revenue, then it has to be used on a capital type of improvement as opposed to an operational type of a matter. So rather than say we give the district or they give the city, $10 million of the district's revenue, then it would arguably have to be used on a capital infrastructure. It couldn't be used for operation and maintenance, for example. So that $10 million goes toward a rec facility or something like that, as opposed to toward maintaining roads or something like that. So it really there are a lot of nuances that go into that. I don't know that we actually didn't organize the Granby Ranch districts, another firm did. So I just want to clarify that since our firm was specifically called out in your comments. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome. But so I don't know what the specifics are in your service plan versus some others, but I can just say that they are a little bit different and it would depend on some of those nuances. But I do think that it is fair. I think you're starting to see this in more jurisdictions and Commissioner Odorizio, I think you're right. I was trying to think of any of the counties that do this and I don't think that there are other than they can charge for a reasonable fee for the original submittal, but it's like limited to $250 for any amendments, which is a joke because I mean, let's be fair, that's like an hour or less worth of somebody's time. And so trying to do anything for the $250 for an amendment, which can be quite honestly the same amount of work as an original service plan, is just not going to cover that. So I think that would be a fair type of change to allow counties to have that same flexibility to charge those types of fees. As I was noting in the comments, and just for anybody that's watching that doesn't have the ability to see the comments, you have jurisdictions like the City and County of Denver that do impose an annual fee on all metro districts, and that's to cover their staff time associated with reviewing annual reports and ensuring compliance and those types of items that they do on an annual basis so they can cover those costs. So having that ability for counties, in my view, would be more than fair to give them that flexibility, and then perhaps covering some kind of advisory board or those types of other actions that the county deem necessary.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. All right. I just want to call a timeout for 1 second to just talk about our time because we are past 4:30. And so I know we wanted to get back and circle around to everyone again, but I also want to be respectful of time. And I could sense that we were on the heels of some potential legislative solutions that Representative Parenti had some very specific questions on. So I wanted to make sure that we really took advantage of the collective expertise in the room and give you all a chance to really chew on that and provide that really valuable both technical guidance back to Representative Parenti as well as just practical experience. So I appreciate everyone hanging with us to really vet that because I could tell that was something that was of interest to the whole group. Now, understanding that we are at 4:33 and people's times are probably limited this afternoon, I wanted to just pose one final thing that we can do just to try to make sure that we're not shortcutting any really important conversation that needs to happen, but also respecting everyone's time. We've talked about a lot of topics. A lot of things have come up already. Many of these topics are also issues that have been raised in some of our previous meetings as well. So what I would like to do is just do one last call for some loose ends. And by loose ends, I mean some really big themes that came out today that have not already been discussed or have been discussed in previous meetings, but maybe just there was one new insight that you gained today as a result of public comment. So that way we're capturing the intent of this, which is reflecting on the public comment, but also not necessarily retracing some of our conversation that we may have had at a previous meeting. Does that sound like a good plan to everyone? Thumbs up if you are in agreement on that. All right. Looks like good consensus because I do know we're getting late. So Marianne, I see your hand is up. Did you have something quick that you wanted to mention before I go around the room again? You're good. Okay. Or did you?
You can just get to me when you go around the room.
Okay, wonderful. So I am going to go around the room, just give everyone their chance. And if you've got nothing, you can play the pass card and that's fine. Because chances are some of you who maybe have more than one issue you want to bring up has been brought up already with someone else. So that is totally okay. So I'm going to go in the same order that we started with. And again, just reminding everyone new insights today as a result of public comment. Really keep it focused just on that so that we can capture all of that input. So I'm going to start with Joe McConnell. Anything new you would like to add?
No, I think it's been a very thorough discussion. You know, a lot of the new disclosures have, I think, made a difference as far as elections and that sort of thing go for metro districts. That's all I really have to say.
Great. All right. Thanks, Joe. Brian Matisse, go ahead.
I do have one new topic that hasn't been discussed. Several of the homeowners made reference to the fact that their districts got into serious financial problems because of compound interest on either developer advances or developer bonds, because the developer, for one reason or another, failed to develop the subdivision over a period of perhaps in some cases decades. While I think we all agree that it's reasonable, and the purpose of metro districts is to finance infrastructure, I think we also should agree that there needs to be some risk on the developer for failed development or development that just doesn't ever develop out, and it shouldn't be on just a few homeowners that wind up purchasing. So I guess the thoughts I have is that perhaps in order to prevent that problem, the legislature could provide a legislative solution that compound interest on developer advances or developer bonds should not accrue, should not be paid by the taxpayers. That it's perfectly fine for them to finance the infrastructure and issue the bonds at the time that the infrastructure is put in. It's perfectly fine for once the bonds are issued to totally independent, the free market, that those individuals collect their interest. But this at least would give make sure the developers have some skin in the game, and that they're not holding on to these 8%, 9%, 10% developer bonds that are accruing interest tax-free for themselves and their progeny at the expense of the taxpayers due to failed development.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. All right, Christopher, you're next. Any new insight that you want to highlight that hasn't been brought up already?
I don't think so. I think that my battery died just as Commissioner Odoricio was going through his climax, and I missed the climax. But I think I understand the notion of the oversight, that direction he was going with that, and I like the prospects of that. I think Jennifer's comments earlier about some reform on the cab concept also I think was good. And again, it all falls back on disclosures. If we can make sure that every homeowner has at least the opportunity to learn as much as they can about the purpose and function of districts, we'll all be better off.
Great. Thank you, Christopher. Appreciate that. Jennifer, new insights that have not already been shared.
I don't have anything new from what we haven't already discussed. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. Natasha.
I would just add first a ditto to Brian, but the one piece we didn't touch that Ms. Schultz talked about, Mr. Gibson talked about, and I've seen firsthand, is what happens when we have homeowners that are being harassed or intimidated. I think Ms. Schultz thought it was a fascist dictatorship. Clearly, I think, unfortunately, this is happening. And yes, 188306 provides some civil penalties or criminal charges that can be brought, but it goes back to Mr. Matisse's earlier comment of what teeth are there, but very specifically I agree, there are many metro districts that are well run, but here on the call today, we heard of a lot of them that are unfortunately not well run. There need to be consequences. I think within Title 32 that don't require the same maybe level of intervention, the 2 checks. And I know the DAs are not thrilled with white collar crime. I don't think 188306 provides the type of teeth that are needed. So that would be my comment. I think it really pains me when we have homeowners feeling so vehemently, and fascist dictatorship, that's a pretty harsh statement. That's someone who has obviously seen a not great metro district. So I think we need to recognize that unfortunately it does happen, and we need to have teeth and consequences.
Great. Thank you, Natasha. Appreciate that. All right, Bert, you're next. Any new insights you'd like to share?
Only the fact that I want to go back to what Representative Parenti said at the beginning, which is what can we do to help owners in older metro districts that are not under the new rules or new statutes that have been passed since then, and we haven't addressed it, whether or not we can make some of the new rules retroactive? And how do we do that? And I think we need to address that issue as well.
All right, thanks, Bert. All right, Mary Ann.
Sorry, I was taking notes on what Bert said. New rules retroactive. Got it. I'll make sure I got the note down. A couple of thoughts. I'll try to be brief. The idea of legislating a tax change that would limit the revenue derived to an inflationary number, I think doesn't take into account what has happened to residential assessment ratios since like let's see, it depends which chart I look at, how far it goes back, but I could start in 1983 when residential assessment ratio was 30% of your property value. And now it's obviously south of 7 and 6 something, depending on which year we're looking at and how we're adjusting. The comment about how Highlands Ranch could make it through with such a lower mill levy, I think is reflective of where those assessment ratios were. And again, if you look at people who are living in districts where they've been living for 35 years or more, they're going to have the lower mill levies. It's the newer developments that have the higher mill levies because two things, the residential assessment ratio keeps going down and the cost of improvements keeps going up and the magnitude of the improvements keeps expanding. Although Highlands Ranch did have a bucket of improvements to finance. What I'm trying to say is that if anybody's going to step into that space and attempt to legislate in that space, one of the things I want to be cognizant of is that the tax base that pays the debt back that the pledge is made from these districts to repay is limited to that area. It's not any bigger than that district's boundaries. And it's starting pretty close to zero and has to grow until it gets to its full build out potential to pay off all of the debt. So again, I don't know if that makes sense to anybody but me, but it's a very complicated subject. Secondly, the idea of saying that intergovernmental agreements are against public policy that set up authorities and that sort of thing. Again, I think we need to be real careful where we step in that space, because if we do that, then the ability to assure the revenue is going to flow to pay back the debt that's issued in phase 1 and future phases isn't there from the beginning. And it is going to be very difficult to sell bonds and be able to assure a bond purchaser that what is being started will reach an end. Also, the same thing on the transition of boards. Metro district elections happen every 2 years. And so the transition that can occur within a district doesn't need to happen. And the disruption that can happen when somebody comes forward to serve on a board, regardless of their qualification, beyond the fact that they live there, in a master plan community where you could be running 20, 30, $1 million of construction in a year, that's a big responsibility for somebody to step into, and potentially with the goal to stop it. When you, again, got people living in the community who are expecting those future amenities to come, they're expecting the interchange to be built, they're expecting the major roadway connections to happen, and all of that isn't in the first bond issue, it comes phases later. And so I would say in the public meetings that I attend with the different authorities that I work with, you will have voices on both sides. There are the voices of the frustrated, and then there's the voices of the, can you hurry up and issue some more bonds because I want that interchange now. I want that connection now. I want the rec center now, and so it is a complicated dynamic, and leaving it to the cities, counties, and towns to manage that and to put the limitations in that they expect. And the reporting and transparency beyond, letting everybody know what's going on, but the ability to yank it out from under, I think is an important thing to leave at the local level where they understand the project and they know what's happening, as opposed to mandating requirements of transition at a state level that have nothing to do with a particular project and what's trying to be financed. So those, I think, are the remaining questions that I had in comments on all the different topics that came up today that we haven't touched on in previous meetings. So thank you,
Great.
Sarah. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Yes, thank you, Mary Ann. Appreciate that. Representative Parenti.
Thank you. I'll just be really quick. Building off of Jennifer Tanaka's comment about cab structures, I think it's important to review the definition of eligible electors at all levels of elections related to the Metro District, whether it's the board or the cab or other structures in place, who's eligible to run for those seats. And then One thing that we haven't really touched on because the data came out a little bit too late is revenue growth and revenue growth caps. And, you know, we talked about mill levy caps, but with the massive increase in evaluations and people just got their property tax bills, I think a lot of people were surprised to see how much of that grew just as a result of their metro districts, not realizing that some of them had exempted themselves from those Tabor growth caps. And so I think looking at revenue growth caps would be something important for the district, the task force to review.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Or thank you, Representative Parenti. Barry, I have you next. Anything new you would like to add? Oh, Barry, can you get a little closer to your computer because we cannot hear you? We still can't hear you, Barry. I'm sorry. He says I'm reading your sign language. He's good. Okay. You can always put something in the chat before we wrap if you want to. All right. Thank you. And then Commissioner Odoricio, how about you? Anything new you would like to add?
Yeah, I think I'm actually going to respond to some of the others real quick, but like I'm worried about trying to legislate bad behavior if someone's a jerk. I don't know if that's possible, Natasha. I think that a lot of that oversight is going to have to come if they break the law. And so those are the things that I look at. Then I think the issue about revenue growth caps or the accrued debt that Brian Matisse and Rep Parenti brought up is, I guess my question would be for Marianne, as she talks about subsequent phases of debt accrual. I think the issue is like, are we saying that there are times where these metro districts accrue the debt and it just sits there and it's not being used for projects? And that's just accruing, because that's not the way I look at it. I thought, so my concern about Brian's question or comment is there should never be a situation where there was a promise made to build a project, but it's still accruing debt while that project's not being built. You know, you're not being charged debt for something that does then when there is no expenditure. So I'm confused by that piece. And I would just want to make sure that we clarify that, because if there's a perception that the authorization of a debt ceiling is the accrual of the actual debt, there's a difference between the two. But I also have some concerns, as Marianne mentioned, is maybe the quinquennial review will handle this with a little bit more oversight. Is like, it doesn't make sense that we allow this ginormous maximum authorization and then not have checks and balances along the way to see if you're moving down that path. Because I think that's what I'm hearing from Mr. Matisse and some of the citizens, is they feel like we're writing this huge blank check and we're not seeing that there's any sort of checks and balances along the way. And I'm hoping maybe if we empower citizens and Metro District taxpayers to better serve as advisors to local government, to utilize existing oversight tools, we might be able to address some of these things. And I'd ask that the legislature give counties the ability to collect the taxes to cover the cost to administer something like this, and to clarify our appointment powers.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Dr. Davis, did you have any final comments that you'd like to make before we wrap?
No, I've just learned so much from this process. I'm fairly new to the housing and metro. So, you know, just being able to listen and take in and glean information has been really beneficial to me. And I do hope to continue participating in something like this.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Davis. All right. So our final comments before we wrap up is I do just want to share with you the process for wrapping up our work as a group. So right here. So first, just a couple things to note is that the interim report for this task group force is due on March 1st. So that is something that we are working on right now with Dora. And I wanted to just give you a couple of bullet points on what to expect. So that report is due March 1st. Both the interim and the final report does have to include those findings and conclusions that came from our conversations around the topics that were specifically identified in legislation. And so just like our public comment today, all of our meetings to date have been organized around those specific topics that were named in the legislation for conversation. You all as task force members are going to be given an opportunity to provide some electronic individual feedback to the report between Monday, March 4th and Friday, March 15th. So you have about 2 weeks there to be able to review the interim report and provide your feedback. You will be getting some more information from Dora on how to access that report when it is released, and then the forms that you'll need to complete in order to provide that feedback online. The second other piece that we need to cover, as you all know, is that we do have to provide that final review of the HOA task force report. We do have that meeting scheduled for April 22nd. That's going to be a 1-hour meeting from 2 to 3. And the HOA report deadline is April 15th. So at the latest, we will have it a week prior to our meeting in April. Obviously, if it's released a little sooner, then we'll have more time to review it beforehand. But those are just some important dates to keep in mind, both for reviewing our interim report next month in March, and then reviewing that final HOA task force report in April. So that is all I have to wrap us up today. Anything, Dora, anything you want to mention, Marcia, or any of the Dora team?
I don't think we have anything extra.
Great, great. Well, I appreciate everyone. Oh, Marianne, did you have one final question?
I do.
Yes.
Yes. My question is, are we meeting again?
We are. We will be meeting on April 22nd for that final review of the HOA report.
Just on the HOA
right
report?
now, yes. Yes.
Okay, so we're not meeting with comments on the preliminary task force thing that we give comments on. That'll be its own box, and that stays over there. And we're just talking about HOA report.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Correct.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yep. Yep. Good clarification. Appreciate that. Anything else? Any final questions before we wrap? Marcia, anything from your team you'd like to mention?
No, I just want to thank everybody for your participation. I mean, you are the reason that I think the report will be successful, and it will help our legislators out with making decisions in the future.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone again for your time. Again, thank you to the members of the public who testified today. It was very valuable input and information, and we look forward to seeing you again in April. And in the meantime, working on that interim report review. So thanks everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.